Robb Stark stood on the ramparts of Mokalan under a dying sky. A late autumn chill crawled down from the mountains of the moonlit north, and the wind hissed through the gaps in the ancient stones. He tried to close his eyes against the swirl of old ghosts whispering in the gloom. Memories of a father beheaded in King's Landing, of a war begun too soon, and a kingdom he hoped to save. His mother, Caitlin, had retreated into silence in the weeks following the betrayals that almost claimed them all. The Riverlands had grown hostile. Bandits roamed the edges of once friendly roads, and the Lannisters bristled in the distance. Yet, even as fear gnawed at them from every angle, the North remained, cold, unyielding, waiting to be reunited with its king in the North. He wondered if he truly deserved that title anymore. So many mistakes, so many regrets. Stannis Baratheon still claimed the Iron Throne. The Lannisters held sway in King's Landing, though they too reeled from infighting. And Roose Bolton, the man who had once seemed a loyal bannerman, grew ever more dangerous, his ambitions metastasizing in the gloom. But for the moment, Robb pressed his hands against the rough stone of the rampart, felt the wind tangle in his dark auburn hair, and listened for something. A rumble, a whisper, a secret. The North was trying to tell him something. Below him, Grey Wind paced in the courtyard, his enormous paws silent on the damp stones. The direwolf's ears twitched and he looked up. They locked eyes, man and beast, and Robb felt a faint echo in the depths of his mind. It had been happening for days now, a pulling at the edges of his senses. Each time he looked at Grey Wind too long, a flicker of warmth or ice or wordless emotion passed between them. More than before, deeper than the bond that started when the pup first took a piece of meat from Robb's hand. He felt an intensity that made his blood stir. Beneath that intensity lurked potential he could not quite name. Bran had once spoken, in cryptic, stuttering phrases, of dreams and slipping into Summer's skin, seeing through the direwolf's eyes. That power, that warging gift, belonged to the Stark blood. A rumor, a myth, until Bran. But now Robb felt it within himself. He'd always shared a closeness with Grey Wind. All the Starks had that connection with their direwolves. Yet this was more, something that caused him, in quiet hours, to wonder if he were going mad. He left the ramparts, descending the worn stairs with purposeful strides. 2 guards saluted him. He gave them a curt nod, and they stepped aside. The courtyard smelled of damp stone and stable hay, the tang of wet iron from the smithy. He let the wind lead him to Grey Wind, who waited, watchful, as if expecting his master's approach. Robb knelt, pressing his palm to the direwolf's massive head, noting the faint scars beneath the thick fur. Grey Wind had fought valiantly in the south, snapping swords with his jaws, bringing terror to the Lannister host. He deserved rest and comfort now, but war was not so easily halted. Soon, Robb whispered, eyes still locked with his wolf's. Soon, the North will come to our aid. We'll gather the lords again. Grey Wind's ears flicked. The wolf huffed softly, eyes glowing amber in the gloom. Robb's thoughts clung to stories old Nan used to tell. He pictured the vast forest north of Winterfell where ordinary wolves roamed in enormous packs. He recalled how the direwolves themselves were said to be near extinction. Until that day he and his siblings discovered the dead mother and her pups in the snow. Something in him stirred, a sense that perhaps there were other wolves in the North, not direwolves, but normal wolves, in such numbers that they had become a legend. He closed his eyes. The wind brushed over him, ruffling his hair, stirring the memory of the faint pull he felt whenever he looked at Grey Wind. Was he truly imagining it? The sense that if he just reached out, he might slip into the direwolf's eyes and run across the yard on 4 legs. He inhaled, exhaled. Time slowed. The chill sank into his bones, or perhaps it was a different kind of cold. A creeping sense of possibility that he could do more than Hyde ever thought. He tried to let his mind drift, carefully, into that half-space where thought gave way to instinct. He felt Grey Wind's breath, felt the night air on the wolf's whiskers. An instant of disorientation seized him. He thought he smelled meat and straw, 1,000 new scents. Then, as quickly as it came, the sensation vanished. He stumbled back, blinking. Gray Wind let out a low whine. It was real. He'd touched it. A moment of that mysterious gift, the Warg. This was more than a dream. Suddenly he felt the weight of it, what it might mean to become like Bran, to enter the skin of a wolf, to fight through its senses and harness that power. And what would he do with it? Save the North? Was that even possible? There was so much to fear, so many enemies poised to strike, so much distrust among the surviving lords. Perhaps if he commanded an army of wolves. No, that was madness. Or was it? He let out a shaky breath, glancing around to ensure no one watched. A stable boy hurried by, balancing a few wooden buckets in his arms, paying no attention to the king in the north. For a moment, Robb almost wished the boy would stop and greet him, to break the swirl in his mind. But the boy vanished into the stable, leaving Robb alone once more. He gently stroked Gray Wind's fur. "You'd tell me if I was going mad, wouldn't you?" The wolf merely blinked. Over the following nights, the dreams began. Vivid dreams. Robb found himself racing through pine forests beneath the starlight, the crisp snow crunching under paws, not boots. The wind carried the smells of rabbits, boxes, living things whose scents he had never recognized so fully. He dreamed of howling at a moon that hung enormous above the treetops. He tasted blood, fresh and steaming, from a kill. But there were also glimpses, just edges, of other wolves. Dozens. He heard their howls, recognized their unique scents. They were drawn to him, or to the beast he inhabited in his dream. The dream wolf drew them in, commanding them with its presence. Robb could feel the fierce thrill of leading a pack. But every time he drew near, the dream ended, leaving him sweaty and tangled in his sheets, his heart pounding. Too often, he rose before dawn with restless energy. He would shrug on his cloak, ignoring the stinging cold, and go to the courtyard to find Gray Wind pacing like a sentinel. Each time their eyes met, Robb sensed the wolf's recognition. They now shared a secret, a bond only deepening in the dark hours of the night. A fortnight passed, each day more turbulent, as ravens arrived with troubling news. House Bolton was gathering men at the Dreadfort. House Manderley was calling banners in White Harbor, uncertain whether to march south or remain near the sea. The Karstarks were restless and suspicious, ever since Robb had beheaded Lord Rickard's son for treason. Hard lines were being drawn. The alliances that once seemed firm threatened to slip through his fingers like wet sand. In these precarious times, he found no comfort in the war councils. Roose Bolton, though distant, had carved out a sense of near independence. Word had it that the Freys, those treacherous turncoats, sought new advantage in the Riverlands, forging uneasy alliances. Though the Red Wedding had never come to pass in this particular weaving of fate, the threat was plain. The Freys still hated him. The Boltons still saw themselves as new powers. The Lannisters for now retreated from Harrenhal, but for how long? One evening, after reading a particularly venomous raven from the Dreadfort, Robb burst from the hall, ignoring the uncertain stares of his men. He found Gray Wind near the gatehouse. The sun had set, and torches flickered behind the iron grills. This time, instead of simply touching the direwolf, Robb bent forward, pressing his forehead to Gray Wind's. He closed his eyes, steadying his breath, feeling the roughness of fur, the warmth beneath. He tried to slip his mind sideways, to nudge open that hidden door he had felt in his dream. A rushing sense overcame him, like plunging into icy water. The courtyard wavered, its colors shifting. Then, just like that, he was no longer looking at Gray Wind. He was Gray Wind. The scents were overwhelming. The shapes of men and walls took on faint glows in the darkness. He caught the torchlight glinting on armor, the earthy tang of the muddy yard. He felt an exhilaration unlike anything he had known. A new awareness, a new vantage. The other presence, Robb's own mind, shook with wonder at the primal clarity that came from living senses so attuned. He took one step on four legs, heart pounding with savage delight. His muzzle parted in a quiet snarl, not out of anger, but out of the sheer intensity of feeling. Then Robb pulled back, startled by the strength of it, by how easy it would be to lose himself in that form. He opened his eyes to find himself once again in his own body, stumbling, gasping. He sensed motion at the corner of his vision. Sir Edmure Tully, a flicker of concern on his face, hovered near the gate. "My lord." Robb forced a tight smile, fighting to steady his pounding pulse. "Just tired," he mumbled. "The night air is cold." Edmure gave him a doubtful look. "Take care. Your mother worries." Robb only nodded and turned away, trying to hide the tremor in his hands. There, at his side, Grey Wind pressed close, as if lending him warmth. That night, Robb had the dream again. Only this time, it was no dream. He intentionally reached for Grey Wind's consciousness once he drifted into a half-sleep. It felt easier now that he'd done it. Together, they wandered the halls of Moat Cailin as man and direwolf. Only the man was no longer bound to 2 legs, but 4. Through Grey Wind's eyes, he roamed. In this near-sleep exploration, he sensed something beyond the walls. A call, faint but discernible, drifting in the blackness of the night. A wolf's call. No, multiple wolves, far away, singing to the moon. The note sparked longing in Grey Wind, a desire to run, join them, fill the night with their howls. And beneath that longing, Robb perceived a subtle recognition. If we answered, they would come. If we beckoned, they would obey. He bolted awake, breath steaming in the chilly air of his chamber. Dawn light stretched pale across the stone floor. He pressed his hand to his temple, the dream fresh and impossible. Could it really be so simple? Could he gather normal wolves, scores of them, and shape them into an army that only a true warg could command? It was a wild idea, one that reeked of old magic and the blood of the first men. Yet the thought refused to leave him. 2 days later, Robb made his decision. Tired of half-steps, he wanted to test the boundaries of this power. Before sunrise he rose from bed, donned his boiled leather jerkin, strapped on his sword belt, and descended to the courtyard. Accompanied by Theon Greyjoy, returned to his side after a tortuous path of betrayal, regret, and renewed loyalty, though still far from forgiven by many, and a handful of his most trusted riders. "We're going out on patrol," Robb told them curtly. Theon studied him with that familiar mixture of brashness and curiosity. "Patrol? At this hour?" "Yes. I need to see the land for myself. We've spent too long in this fortress. If we're to gather the strength of the North, we can't cower behind stone walls." No one questioned him further, though Theon's gaze lingered on Grey Wind. The great direwolf padded silently at Robb's side, ears pricked. They set off, riding north along the King's Road. The morning air tasted of frost. Dark clouds hovered on the horizon, promising snow. Robb led the column, Theon at his side, a small retinue of 8 mounted men behind them, no banners flapping to draw attention. Grey Wind loped along, tireless, occasionally trotting close enough for Robb to brush his shaggy coat with a hand. As the day wore on, they left behind the marshy lowlands near Moat Cailin, entering a region of sparse pine and rocky outcroppings. The hush of the north enveloped them. Birdsong was rare, the wind-rustling pine needles their only companion. Despite the tension gripping Robb's mind, he felt a certain ease in the wilderness. The open skies, the uncharted forest. This was his home in a way the Riverlands had never been. Near midday, they dismounted to rest the horses by a narrow stream. While the others drank from water skins and gnawed on strips of salt beef, Robb pulled Theon aside. He glanced at the men. Most were too hungry or were weary to pay them any attention. "That was good. I want to slip into the trees, just for a short while," Robb said quietly. "I need to clear my head." Theon frowned. "Should I come with you?" Robb shook his head. "No. Stay with the men. I won't be long." "Very well." Theon shrugged, though concern etched his features. "Don't go too far." Robb gave him a tight nod, and then with Grey Wind padding at his side he moved into the dense pines. He found a hollow a short distance from the stream, the cold, damp earth smelling of moss. Settling against a trunk, he motioned for Grey Wind to lie beside him. Once sure he was alone, Robb closed his eyes and inhaled deeply. There, in the hush of the pine forest, he tried to shed the burdens of war and worry. Instead, he reached once more for that hidden link, that sliver of magic embedded in his blood. Grey Wind's presence roared to life, enveloping him in a swirl of predatory senses. Robb felt the shift instantly. The undergrowth, the bark of trees, the swirling wind, they all popped with color and scent. He wanted to run, to hunt, to taste living flesh, but he kept hold of a measure of control. He was man and wolf, combined. He raised his muzzle, parted Grey Wind's jaws, and let out a deep, resonant howl. The sound echoed through the quiet forest, bouncing off trunks and boulders, rippling across the pines. A hush fell in its wake. Robb's heart thrummed. Was he a fool to think the wolves of the north would answer a single call? He stilled. Moments passed. Then came an answering howl, faint yet clear, somewhere to the northwest. Another to the east. Another from the south, perhaps a mile off. It was as if the forest itself had awakened. Robb felt a surge of joy, mingled with an almost dizzy sense of possibility. He concentrated, letting Grey Wind's instincts guide him, letting the direwolf soul speak to the wild. The howls continued, some long and mournful, others short and urgent. They drew nearer. The flicker of movement caught Grey Wind's keen eyes. Among the pines, a lean gray wolf materialized, hackles raised, ears forward in cautious curiosity. This was not a direwolf, but it was large for a common wolf, perhaps half the size of Grey Wind. Then another wolf slunk up behind the first, sniffing the air. Soon, Robb counted 4, 5, 6 wolves prowling in a half-circle around them, restless and intrigued. He tensed, but Grey Wind's posture remained calm. There was no growl, no aggression. Instead, Robb guided Grey Wind to lower his head slightly, an invitation. He felt a primal language flow through him. The lead wolf, a scar across its muzzle, approached, sniffed at Grey Wind's flank, then whined softly, stepping back. The rest of the small pack followed, tails wagging, perhaps unsure how to greet such a large newcomer. Then more wolves arrived, drifting through the trees like living shadows. 12, 15. Robb lost count, but the number grew, and each seemed strangely drawn to Grey Wind. The direwolf stood as tall as a small pony. In the ancient lore, the direwolf was revered by lesser wolves as an alpha beyond any they had ever seen. Robb felt something inside his chest flare with excitement. He let Grey Wind bark, a short commanding cry, and the lesser wolves drew closer, ears perked. In a swirl of fur, they pressed around the direwolf, licking at his muzzle, sniffing him, rubbing their flanks against him. Robb could sense each wolf's place in the pack dynamic, sense the synergy forming around Grey Wind as the apex. But how far did this bond extend? Carefully, Robb tried to stretch his consciousness beyond Grey Wind's body, to touch the other wolves. For an instant, he felt a faint glimmer, like a half-formed bridge to the mind of the scar-muzzled wolf. But it wasn't as strong as the bond with Grey Wind. Their eyes flicked to Robb's vantage, or rather, Grey Wind's vantage. Curious, but they didn't yield their minds in the same way. Still, there was an undeniable connection. He could sense a willingness, a readiness to follow. It was not absolute control, but if he pressed them, commanded them through Grey Wind's posture and signals, they might comply. This was not the same as simply being the biggest wolf. Robb felt the swirl of old magic. A warg could do more. He almost lost himself in the exhilaration. But he heard a shout in the distance, Tien calling, "Robb! Where are you?" "In Elanai." Reluctantly, Robb let himself slip back to human form. He blinked as his vision returned to normal. The forest sense dulled. He was merely Robb Stark again, kneeling in the pine needles, a fresh ache in his limbs. Grey Wind stood in front of him, panting, and all around them, the wolves watched. Even with his human eyes, Robb saw the wariness in those golden pupils. Carefully, he lifted himself up. The wolves stirred, stepping back, uncertain. He raised a hand, letting them take in his scent. Some snarled softly in confusion. But Grey Wind kept close, letting out another bark that stilled their aggression. Robb breathed. Then, in the quiet of the forest, he whispered, "I am Robb Stark of Winterfell, the king in the north." It was foolish to speak to them as if they understood. Yet, in that moment, it felt only right. He turned to leave. Grey Wind followed. The rest of the wolves parted to let them pass, tails low. Robb could feel their presence behind him, eyes gleaming. They would not simply vanish. Some might trail him for a while. Others might wander off. But the connection was made. When he emerged near the stream, Theon and the others stood, tension rippling as they saw the small parade of wolves that followed. The men reached for their swords, confusion etched on their faces. "Steady," Robb commanded. Grey Wind trotted ahead, quiet but imposing. The other wolves, about half a dozen that had chosen to follow from the larger pack, lingered at the tree line, clearly apprehensive of the mounted men. Theon's eyes widened. "What in the seven hells?" Robb lifted a hand. "They're not a threat." As if on cue, the lead wolf, a scruffy, gray-furred bitch, lowered its head. A ripple passed among them, and they turned, darting back into the pines, vanishing from sight. All except Grey Wind, who padded closer to Robb's side. One of the men, a tall spearman named Luis, swallowed hard. "My lord, did you call them?" Robb hesitated. Then, recalling the old ways of the north, he gave a nod. "The wolves are with us." Theon's gaze flicked to the trees where they had disappeared. He managed a half-laugh of amazement. "That's impossible. And yet I saw it with my own eyes." Robb did not elaborate. He only mounted his horse, patted Grey Wind's flank, and spurred onward. The retinue fell in behind him, still casting nervous glances at the shadows. Robb led them north again. Inside, he felt electrified by the encounter. He had only glimpsed the surface of what might be accomplished. But the question loomed large: how to harness this for the sake of the north? It was one thing to have a handful of feral wolves at his side, quite another to command them in battle. Could he truly forge a force out of the wild, to stand against the Boltons or the Freys, or even the Lannisters if they dared set foot in the north again? The weight of that dream pressed on him, but so did the thrill. A few days passed in a blur of slow travel, tense nights, and half-formed experiments. Robb would make camp with his men, pretending to settle in for the night. Then, once the sentries were posted, he would slip away with Grey Wind, warging into the direwolf's body to wander among the wild packs. Each night, more wolves answered the howls. Each night, Robb's confidence in his ability to guide them grew. He felt the shape of it now, a connected network of wolves stretching across the northern forests. Not an army in the conventional sense, but a living tapestry of fur and fang. In war, they could strike supply lines, harry enemy scouts, wreak havoc on the flanks of any invading force. But at the heart of it, Robb felt something deeper, a sense of belonging. This was more than just strategy. The wolves awakened something in him that had lain dormant, a piece of his heritage that bound him to the old gods and the land itself. The toll on his human body was not negligible. Each time he slipped into Grey Wind's skin, he returned exhausted, hungry, sometimes disoriented. He began to adopt new habits, eating more meat, thirsting for fresh water the moment he woke from the Warg trances. He found himself bristling when men approached too quickly, suppressing a low growl that threatened to escape his throat. He knew he had to maintain his human side, or risk being lost in the wolf. Eventually, he led his retinue back to Moat Cailin. At dawn, they passed through its battered gates. Soldiers in stark livery gathered to greet him. Robb dismounted, legs stiff. Grey Wind shook out his fur. Catelyn Stark stood at the steps leading into the great hall, a cloak wrapped tight around her shoulders, anxiety etched on her lined face. She hurried forward, eyes scanning her son for any sign of injury. "You're well?" she asked softly. He nodded. "I am, Mother." Her gaze shifted uneasily to Grey Wind, the direwolf's muzzle still stained from a hunt 2 nights prior. "I can't help but notice the wolf has grown restless. Are you certain all is well, my son?" "Vedamn." Robb forced a gentle smile. "We are well enough. Come, Let us speak inside. I have matters to discuss with you and our council." She hesitated but turned, leading the way. They convened in the great hall's antechamber, joined by a handful of loyal advisers, Sir Brynden, Blackfish Tully, Mage Mormont, and a few trusted northern lords who had rallied to Robb's cause. The torches flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Robb took a seat at the head of the table, gray wind settling at his feet. Before any official business began, Caitlin faced her son, voice low and urgent. "What is this I hear of you leading patrols at night, venturing into the deep woods? The men whisper that you command packs of wolves." Her lips pressed thin, as if the words tasted of fear. Robb didn't flinch. "Some of it is rumor, surely." "Yet not all rumor," Sir Brynden cut in, crossing his arms. "I have heard from men who saw you vanish among wolves without a scratch. They claim the beasts answer to you." Robb's gaze swept the room. He saw curiosity and alarm. The North had tales of skin changers, wargs, greenseers, but such powers were often regarded with a mixture of awe and dread. Yet he had no choice but to reveal a measure of truth. He cleared his throat. "I do not deny I have a connection to Grey Wind, nor that I can influence ordinary wolves. Such is the blood of the Starks, drawn from the ancient line of the first men. My brother Bran had similar gifts, though perhaps stronger or different. I have discovered that I, too, can slip into Grey Wind's mind, and that the wolves of the forests will follow him, and in some measure, me." "Mr. Martin." A hush fell. Maege Mormont, ever practical, broke it with a short grunt. "If the old gods have given you this power, we should use it. The North is threatened by House Bolton and others. Wolves might help tip the balance." The Blackfish nodded thoughtfully. "War is not a game of fair fights. The Lannisters taught us that, the phrase as well. If you can gain an edge—" He trailed off, letting the implication hang. Caitlin glanced from face to face, clearly torn. "I do not question the gift of the old gods, but I fear for Robb. Magic carries a price. And what of the men? If they see him leading beasts into battle, will they fear him or revere him?" Robb straightened. "We must be careful, yes, but the Boltons gather strength. We cannot face them alone, not with our ranks so thinned by previous battles. If we could unite the northern houses, along with the hidden might of the forest, then we may have a chance at reigning in the threat." His mother exhaled slowly. "Very well. But promise me, Robb, you will not push yourself too far. The men might call you the young wolf, but I have seen too many wolves cut down by steel. They seem to 17 now." He leaned forward, placing a hand on hers. "I promise, Mother. I'll be careful." Word spread, though carefully controlled, that the king in the north had a special bond with wolves. Robb's men, mostly loyal northerners, did not flee in terror or revolt. Perhaps they remembered the old ways, or perhaps they were simply desperate for any advantage. Some told tales of how House Stark's sigil was the direwolf for a reason. Others invented outlandish rumors that Robb could become a giant wolf himself, that he would devour the hearts of the Bolton men. Robb chose not to quash every rumor. Let fear blossom in his enemies, let awe stir in his allies. Quietly, he sent out ravens to the Karstarks, the Umbers, the Mormonts, the Glovers, and even to White Harbor, calling for a gathering at Winterfell. He declared his intent to unify the North once more, to stand against the Boltons and any who dared sow division. The letters were carefully phrased, promising both an olive branch and a show of force if needed. Meanwhile, Robb prepared to leave Moat Cailin to march northward. The plan was to retake Winterfell, still half in ruins from Theon's misguided occupation in a past timeline. Though in this changed reality it stood battered but not entirely lost, and re-establish it as the seat of House Stark. But first, he had to ensure the road was safe. Scouts reported bands of Bolton men harassing travelers. Worse yet, stories of monstrous hounds in the service of Ramsay Snow drifted south. Stories of men flayed or hunted for sport. Robb felt a cold rage simmer within him whenever Ramsay's name arose. That bastard of Bolton was a blight upon the North, infamous for cruelty. Late one evening, Robb left the keep, accompanied by Grey Wind and 2 of his personal guard. They rode into the gloom, determined to flush out a group of Bolton riders rumored to be prowling the edges of the forest. In truth, Robb also intended to test the power of the wolf packs in an actual skirmish. They found the Bolton riders near dusk, near a cluster of gnarled trees. Bolton men, 6 in total, wore cloaks of dark leather and carried torches, as if searching for travelers to terrorize. Robb signaled his guards to fan out and surround them quietly. The plan was to ambush. However, the wind shifted, and one of the Bolton horses caught Robb's scent. A panicked snort gave them away. The Bolton riders reined around, torches flaring, eyes sweeping the trees. Robb spurred his horse forward, sword drawn, gray wind racing ahead on silent paws. The clash was swift. Robb's men fell upon the Boltons from 2 sides. Steel clashed in the flickering torchlight. Gray wind barreled into one man's mount, sending horse and rider crashing to the ground. The direwolf's fangs closed on the rider's throat before he could scream. Another Bolton man tried to angle his horse away, but Robb kicked his mount into a charge, slashing the man's torso with a vicious downswing. 2 of the Boltons wheeled around, fleeing in panic. Robb whistled sharply, a sound that echoed in the darkness. A moment later, shapes emerged from the forest. Wolves, 6 or more, that had been prowling unseen. At Gray Wind's lead, they pursued the fleeing riders, howling. Robb watched from a distance, breathing heavily, as the wolves caught up. He could see them pulling one rider from the saddle, the man's screams cutting abruptly short. The second rider, perhaps spurred by terror, vanished into the deeper darkness, horse galloping wildly. Still, the wolves gave chase, their howls receding. It was over in minutes. His guards gathered around, panting. One had a bleeding cut on his arm, but nothing fatal. They exchanged glances of astonishment and horror. The bodies of the Bolton men lay in twisted heaps on the forest floor. Gray Wind returned, muzzle dripping red. Robb dismounted, placing a hand on the direwolf's neck, steadying himself. "That was," one guard muttered, unable to find the words. Robb looked into Gray Wind's eyes. The direwolf's bloodlust pulsed in the aftermath of the kill, but Robb also felt his own heart pounding with a savage triumph. He had not only bested the Bolton men, but harnessed the wolves as well. He knew it would not always be so easy. Yet, the demonstration filled him with renewed resolve. Let the Boltons tremble. The wolves of the north were waking. Within a fortnight, Robb and a modest force left Moat Cailin, heading north along the wide track toward Winterfell. He traveled with some 200 mounted men, supported by another 300 foot, and trailing supply carts. Gray Wind padded at his side, and often at dusk, feral wolves hovered at the edges of camp, their eyes glowing in the firelight. People whispered of an uncanny hush whenever Robb passed. Even the horses seemed to sense an otherworldly presence clinging to the young king. The nights grew colder. Snow threatened, though the heart of winter had not yet fallen. As they approached Winterfell's outskirts, they found signs of disrepair, collapsed outbuildings, scorched sections of wall from old battles. However, smoke rose from chimneys, and a small garrison loyal to House Stark came out to greet them with subdued cheers. "Winterfell still stands, my lord," said the garrison's captain, a burly man in Stark livery. "We've been making repairs as best we can." Robb dismounted in the courtyard, looking around with a heavy heart. Memories of childhood flooded him, the time he raced with Bran around the yard, the lessons in swordsmanship from his father, the welcoming bark of Gray Wind as a pup. Winterfell was battered but alive. He found the old godswood largely intact, the weirwood tree standing silent vigil over the reflection pool. Robb knelt at its roots that evening, alone except for Gray Wind, whose presence had become inseparable from his own. He pressed a hand to the trunk, feeling the faint pulse of ancient magic. He prayed to the old gods for guidance, for strength, for the north. When he rose, the leaves whispered overhead. He thought he sensed a voice in the wind, but it was too faint to name. The next day, the bannermen began to arrive. Mage Mormont came with 50 fierce warriors from Bear Island, all wearing pelts and carrying axes. Lord Manderley's representative arrived with a handful of knights, delivering a polite letter that made it clear White Harbor was wary but willing to negotiate. The Karstarks remained absent, which worried Robb, but House Glover sent a small contingent, expressing relief that a true Stark was back in Winterfell. In the Great Hall, partially rebuilt with new timbers, Robb gathered them around the large wooden table, draped with a map of the North. They spoke of House Bolton's ambitions, of Rusu's cunning and Ramsay's sadism. They debated strategy for hours, the lords sometimes quarreling. But none could deny that the Bolton threat had to be crushed, or the North would never know peace. At last, Meg Mormont, ever blunt, turned to Robb. "We have fewer men than the Boltons, let alone if they ally with the Freys. What is your plan to tip the balance?" The hall fell silent. Robb felt their eyes upon him. Some had heard rumors. Others had not. He stood, letting the hush weigh. He began simply, "We have a resource that none of our enemies possess. The wolves of the North." Low murmurs broke out. Some exchanged uneasy looks. Others nodded, recalling old legends. Robb raised a hand for quiet. "I do not claim we can fight battles solely with wolves, but consider this. The Boltons rely on intimidation, on controlling roads and supply lines. Our own men can slip through the forests, guided by wolves to disrupt their efforts. My dire wolf, Grey Wind, can communicate with those packs. Together, we can harass them without exposing our full host. Once we weaken them, we can meet them in open battle with the advantage." Nemnichan. The lords exchanged glances. Lord Glover cleared his throat. "I have heard tales that you can speak to the wolves. Is this true?" Robb met his gaze. "Yes, it is an ancient gift in my blood. I will not pretend it is common or easy, but it is real. We have already used it to strike down Bolton riders. With time, I can rouse more of the packs to our cause." An older lord snorted. "Next you'll say you can fly with the crows." He stopped short when he saw Mage Mormont's glower. "You disbelieve?" Robb said quietly. "Very well." He gestured to a guard at the door. "Bring me the rest of our newly arrived friends." In moments, a pair of Stark soldiers led in several wolves, not deer wolves, but large, lean forest wolves that had been lurking in the castle's outer wards. They moved warily, but did not attack or flee. Gasps rose from some of the lords. Robb walked to the wolves, hand outstretched. Grey Wind stood behind him like a sentinel. The wolves nuzzled Robb's palm, tails twitching in uneasy deference. Then he locked eyes with Grey Wind. Slowly he let himself sink into that half-trance he had practiced so often. He kept enough of his human mind to remain standing, but in the wolf's gaze, he felt a surge of shared emotion. He let out a low, short howl that rose and fell, a demand for attention. The wolves lifted their heads, ears pricked. They sat, almost as if tamed. A ripple of astonishment spread through the hall. Some men shifted uncomfortably, others stared with wide eyes. Meg Mormont let out a satisfied grunt. Robb withdrew from the wolf's consciousness, feeling a wave of dizziness. He placed a steadying hand on Grey Wind's flank. "This is only a small demonstration," he said, voice echoing. "Those who follow me will have the wolves of the forest as allies. We will strike fear into the hearts of the Boltons, and we will reclaim our birthright, a free North united under House Stark." A moment passed in stunned silence. Then Mage rose, slamming her fist to her chest in salute. "I will fight with you, King in the North." Her warriors echoed the cry. Lord Glover nodded, though a bit pale. "I stand with House Stark." Others began to call out their approval. Robb saw in their eyes a flicker of awe. Even those uncertain realized this might be the edge they needed. Robb ended the meeting, retreating to the courtyard. He found a quiet spot where Grey Wind could pace. Caitlin approached, worry creasing her brow. "You told them about your power." "I had no choice," Robb said softly. "They must understand what I can do. We need them committed to the fight." She rested a hand on his arm. "Just remember who you are, Robb. This power is a tool, not your identity." "Manin." He nodded, though he felt in his heart that it was more than a mere tool. It was part of him now, inseparable. He was Robb Stark, King in the North, a Warg. The plan took shape. Robb sent scouts and Warg-linked wolves into the countryside to locate Bolton patrols, outposts, and supply lines. Boltons traveling between the Dreadfort and Barrowton began to vanish. Tales spread among small folk of ghostly wolves that appeared at dusk, led by a giant direwolf with burning eyes. Some said the direwolf was a demon. Others claimed it was the spirit of Ned Stark, avenging his son. In truth, Robb coordinated these strikes from Winterfell, slipping into Grey Wind's consciousness nightly. He tasted blood as the wolves fell upon unsuspecting Boltons. He felt the rush of each kill, the fierce unity of the hunt. By day he planned with his lords, reorganizing levies, repairing the walls of Winterfell, and forging alliances. The tension between being man and wolf grew. There were mornings he woke restless, body sore, half forgetting that he needed clothes or that humans cooked food. The desire to remain in the forest with the wolves tugged at him powerfully. But he pushed it aside, forcing himself to remain a king. The fruit of these efforts became apparent. Reports from the Dreadfort told of near panic. Ramsay Snow had lost dozens of men to wolf raids. Peasants under Bolton rule murmured that House Stark had called upon the old gods for revenge. Meanwhile, some of the minor houses that once wavered now rallied to Robb, seeing that the winds had changed. But not all was easy. Winterfell's supplies were limited, and more men arriving meant more mouths to feed. Lord Manderley's letter made it clear that while White Harbor would support Robb in a final confrontation, they demanded promises of trade routes and protections. The Karstarks still refused to answer any summons, harboring bitterness for the execution of Rickard Karstark's son Dotki. Robb had to plan carefully, balancing diplomacy and might. In the midst of this, another threat loomed. Walder Frey. While not as powerful in the north, the Freys had a knack for alliances. Word reached Winterfell that envoys from the Dreadfort had traveled to the Twins, possibly to broker a deal. If the Freys joined the Boltons, the war could become far more complicated. One frigid morning, as Robb stood atop Winterfell's walls, scanning the horizon, Theon joined him. Theon's face was drawn, stubble darkening his jaw. He spoke quietly. Scouts say a large band of Bolton men has been spotted to the east, heading this way, possibly 300 strong. Robb set his jaw. A challenge. They must be testing us. The men are ready, but should we ambush them before they reach Winterfell? Robb's eyes narrowed. Yes, let's show them the north is ours. He summoned his captains, laid out a plan. They would send a contingent of mounted archers to lure the Boltons into a stretch of forest near the Broken Branch River. Meanwhile, Robb and a hand-picked force of foot soldiers, supported by as many wolves as he could muster, would flank them. He rode out with Grey Wind that afternoon, the air cold enough to sting his lungs. A light snow fell, dusting the trees and roads in white. Their scouts quickly found the Bolton force, marching in columns, carrying flayed man banners. Robb felt fury twist in his gut at the sight of that grotesque sigil. The ambush was set at dusk. The mounted archers feigned a skirmish, loosing arrows that felled a few Boltons and angered the rest, then retreated, drawing the Bolton host into the forest. As the foe advanced deeper, bogged down by thick snow and cautious of hidden threats, Robb waited. He knelt in the undergrowth, sword sheathed at his side, hand resting lightly on Grey Wind's back. Around them, scattered among the trees, were at least 24 wolves, plus 100 Stark men. Snowflakes drifted in the fading light. When the Bolton banners drew close, Robb closed his eyes. Slipping half into Grey Wind's mind, he let out a long, reverberating howl, deep as thunder. Grey Wind's pack erupted from the trees like a dark wave. The Stark men charged behind them. Chaos ensued. The Bolton soldiers, startled by the sudden onslaught of beasts, tried to form ranks, but the wolves were among them in moments, tearing at exposed limbs, pulling men down. Some Boltons managed to defend themselves with shields and pikes, killing or wounding a few wolves. But Grey Wind was unstoppable, leaping for the throat of a Bolton captain, dragging him into the snow. Robb emerged, sword in hand, rallying his own men. He felt as though he had the wolves' senses guiding him. He knew where the breaks in the Bolton lines were, sensed the swirl of fear radiating from the confused enemy. He led a furious charge into their flank, steel and fang together. The battle was savage, short, and decisive. The Bolton force, unable to properly form up in the thick woods and harried by wolves, broke ranks. Some men fled, only to be cut down or scattered into the darkness. Others surrendered, throwing down their weapons and crying for mercy. Robb's men took perhaps 50 prisoners. The rest lay dead or had run off. As the fight subsided, Robb found himself standing in a clearing, chest heaving. Snow was stained with patches of red. Wolves prowled among the fallen, sniffing for survivors. Robb forced himself to call them off with a series of sharp whistles and a low growl through Grey Wind's lips. Slowly, the wolves backed away from the dead and wounded. He surveyed the carnage. They had lost a few men, but far fewer than they might have. The wolves had been pivotal, sowing panic and disorder. Robb noted each dead wolf with regret. They were his allies now, as dear as any soldier under his command. He knelt by one such fallen creature, gently stroking its cooling fur, whispering thanks. Grey Wind watched with solemn eyes. Eventually, Theon approached, face spattered with blood. "We've captured some of them alive," he said. "A few claim to know the Bolton's plan." Robb rose, steeling himself. "We will question them. Then we march back to Winterfell. Prepare for the next move." His men looked at him with awe shining in their eyes. The stories would only grow after this, of the king in the north who fought with wolves at his side. Robb wondered how soon the Boltons would realize they faced not just a mortal enemy, but the living embodiment of the North's ancient power. That night, back in Winterfell, they interrogated the prisoners, gleaning valuable intelligence. Rumors indicated that Roose Bolton himself was preparing a larger army at the Dreadfort, likely waiting for more men from reluctant lords or from the Freys. The few survivors from the ambush had fled back east, presumably to deliver news of the Stark wolves. Restless, Robb retired to his chambers late, ignoring the roiling sense of adrenaline in his veins. He felt neither triumph nor relief, only a grim determination that the struggle was far from over. A small fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Grey Wind lay near the door, ever watchful. Robb removed his armor, letting it drop with heavy clanks. His body was sore. He washed his face in a basin of cold water, wincing at the bruises forming on his arms and shoulders. Finally, he threw himself onto the bed. But sleep did not come easily. He drifted between wakefulness and the edges of Grey Wind's consciousness, half dreaming of a vast forest haunted by spectral shapes. He imagined the old gods whispering, calling him deeper into the wolf's way. In that twilight dream, he saw a monstrous figure, a flayed man with pale eyes, lips curled in a mocking grin. Bolton, or something that represented the Boltons. Behind that figure stood a wall of ice, a sense of looming winter. He awoke, shivering, uncertain of the meaning. The hour was dark, well past midnight. Grey Wind stood, ears pricked, staring at the door. A soft knock came. Robb rose, pulled on a tunic, and opened it to find Catelyn outside, wrapped in a heavy cloak. Her face looked wan in the torchlight. "Mother," Robb said quietly. "What is it?" "Forgive me for disturbing you," she whispered, stepping inside. "I couldn't sleep. Memories of the battle, the talk of wolves. Your father used to say we must always be on guard against letting violence define us." She paused, glancing at Grey Wind. But he also knew the North's hardships. He knew winter was coming. Sometimes, I wonder if he foresaw all of this. Robb gently shut the door. "Father did what he believed was right. We must do the same." She nodded, eyes glistening. "I see the way men look at you now. You have power, Robb. Power greater than any Stark has wielded in centuries. I only ask that you remember compassion. Remember mercy." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "I won't become a monster, but I will protect our people, no matter what it takes." Catelyn sighed. "Yes, I know. Good night, my son." When she left, Robb stared at the dying embers of the fire. He understood her fears. Magic could twist men, especially in times of war. But he believed he was different. He hoped so at least. He tried to return to sleep. Before drifting off, he heard the distant howling of wolves, carried on the night wind. A faint smile touched his lips. He was not alone. With Winterfell secured and a partial alliance forged among several key northern houses, Robb knew the time had come to confront Bolton power directly. If left unchecked, Roose Bolton would gather strength enough to strike at Winterfell. The standoff could drag on, leaving the North in turmoil. The final confrontation would have to be carefully orchestrated. Although Robb had a potent advantage with the wolves, the Boltons still outnumbered him if they mustered all their allies. Frey interference remained a risk. The Karstarks loomed as a wild card, unpredictable in their anger. Yet the wolves gave Robb a mobility and intelligence network that Roose could not match. Through Grey Wind, Robb coordinated with scattered wolf packs, learning of every movement near the Dreadfort. Moreover, smaller Bolton forces were being picked off one by one. Morale among the Bolton men was rumored to be plummeting. Then a raven arrived from Barrowton, bearing news that the Karstarks were marching to join Bolton. That sealed Robb's resolve. They must move, quickly. On a cold, gray morning, under leaden skies, Robb called his assembled forces to the courtyard of Winterfell. Banners snapped in the brisk wind. Direwolves for House Stark, bears for Mormont, silver fists for Glover, and others. Soldiers stood in ranks, breath misting in the frosty air, eyes fixed on their king. Wolves prowled the periphery, stirring excitement and apprehension. Robb mounted his horse, Grey Wind at his side. He surveyed the gathered men, over 1,000 strong now, bolstered by lords who had arrived in the last week. More might join en route, but it was enough to commence. He spoke clearly, voice echoing off the stone walls. Men of the North, we stand at a turning point. Roose Bolton has forsaken our cause and threatens our homes. We will march east, drive him from the Dreadfort, and end his tyranny once and for all. We fight not just for ourselves, but for every northern soul who deserves to live free of terror. Let the Boltons tremble at the sound of our approach, for we are the North, unyielding, united, and unafraid. Nay! A cheer erupted, spears and swords raised high. The wolves howled, a piercing chord that sent shivers through the crowd. Robb felt his heart surge with a grim pride. They set out that very day. Snow drifted lazily, painting the land in white. The column stretched long, knights and mounted archers in the vanguard, infantry behind, wagons in the rear. The wolves, guided by Grey Wind, flitted through the trees, scouting. The march took them through farmland and forest, villages and frozen streams. At each place, they found signs of Bolton oppression, burned cottages, half-starved peasants. Each atrocity fueled the army's anger. More villagers came forward to provide information or supplies, rallying to the Stark cause. When they neared the Dreadfort's domain, the terrain grew harsher, rocky hills, thick forests, and the wide expanse of the White Knife meandering through. Frost glistened on bare branches, the sky leaden. Scouts brought word of Bolton patrols, massing. Yet the patrols seldom dared approach. Stories of wolves had spread like wildfire. Robb directed smaller squads of cavalry to raid outlying Bolton positions, always supported by wolves. As they advanced, the enemy fell back, clearly trying to consolidate around the fortress. At last, in the late afternoon of a day that felt like it might herald a storm, they beheld the Dreadfort's dark silhouette on the horizon. Its pale stone walls rose starkly amid the gloom, banners of the flayed man visible even at a distance. Smoke curled from chimneys, and the surrounding terrain bristled with stakes and ramparts. Bolton men swarmed, preparing defenses. Robb rode to a small rise, gazing across the field that stretched before the fortress. There was no way to sneak up on the Dreadfort, but a direct assault would be costly. They had to be cunning. Maeg Mormont rode up beside him. We'll pay a high price if we storm those walls. Robb nodded. I have no desire for a siege in the dead of winter, nor an endless assault. We'll test them first. Tonight, we'll send in the wolves to harass their supplies. We have enough archers to keep them pinned. With luck, we might lure them out. Blackfish Tully joined them. Roose is cunning. He might not sally forth easily. He'll hold, counting on the weather and time to weaken us. Robb stroked Grey Wind's head, feeling the direwolf's tension. Then we'll starve him. But we won't be idle. The wolves can move at night, slip through weak points. Let us see if the Boltons fear the darkness. None. They made camp on the far side of a low ridge, well out of arrow range. Fires flickered, the men huddled in tents. Wolves roamed the perimeter. Robb gathered his captains, finalizing plans. Then, as dusk fell, he donned a heavy cloak and ventured out with Grey Wind, alone. He found a secluded copse of trees, far from camp. He knelt in the snow, ignoring the cold biting his knees. Grey Wind stood by, breath steaming. Robb closed his eyes. Despite his fatigue, he summoned the Warging connection, letting his consciousness merge with Grey Wind. The swirl of sensations engulfed him. The crisp night air, the tang of approaching snow, the flicker of distant torchlight from the Dreadfort. Through Grey Wind's eyes, he moved stealthily closer to the fortress, skirting guard patrols. Other wolves joined them along the way, 8, then 12, then 20. Their breaths came in frosty puffs. They recognized Grey Wind as Alpha, acknowledging Robb's presence with flickers of submission. They circled the fortress, picking out weaknesses, less guarded gates, supply wagons, stables. Through Grey Wind's heightened senses, Robb smelled the reek of fear mingled with the musk of horses. Then, at a silent signal, they struck. Wolves slunk in through a narrow drainage ditch, attacked a stable yard where a small guard contingent huddled. Screams shattered the night. Torches dropped. Horses whinnied in terror, bolting. A few more wolves bounded toward a storage shed, tearing through a flimsy door to ravage the supplies within. Men shouted, horns blared. Panic rippled in the darkness. Robb guided Grey Wind deeper, snapping at one guard's leg, dragging him into the snow. The man's terror stung Robb's mind, yet he fought to remain in control, to keep from drowning in the wolf's savage fury. This was war, brutal and unforgiving. From the ramparts, crossbow bolts whistled down. A wolf yelped, struck. Another ducked into shadows. Grey Wind dodged behind a cart, hackles raised. Robb sensed they had achieved enough chaos. He called them back with a throaty howl. One by one, the wolves retreated, melting into the night. Bolton men swarmed the yard, shouting curses and instructions. Flames rose from a scattered torch that had landed on straw. The fortress yard was in disarray. By the time the Boltons organized a response, the wolves were gone. Robb slipped from Grey Wind's mind, returning to his own body in the snowy copse. He staggered, breath catching. The connection always took a toll, but it was worth it. He imagined the dread that now gripped the garrison. Let them fear the darkness indeed. He returned to camp, eyes burning with exhaustion, but the night's mission was accomplished. Within hours, scouts reported seeing smoke and hearing the wails of wounded men from inside the Dreadfort. Come morning, Robb assembled his captains again. The time for a formal siege was at hand, but the wolves would keep up their nightly raids, preventing the Boltons from resting. Starvation, fear, and the biting cold would do much of the work. Then, perhaps, Roose Bolton would be forced to sally out or surrender. For a week, the siege continued. Each night, wolves attacked at different points, sowing panic. Bolton attempts to sally forth in small groups ended in disaster. Arrows from Stark archers, combined with wolf assaults, drove them back. Food inside the Dreadfort dwindled. But Roose Bolton remained hidden behind his walls, refusing to yield. Rumors circulated that he believed reinforcements were coming, perhaps from Karstark men. Storm clouds gathered overhead, threatening heavy snowfall. Time grew short. Robb stood on a slight rise, looking upon the fortress walls. He frowned. Something was happening behind those ramparts. He could sense movement. Through Grey Wind, he had glimpsed an unusual stir during the last night's raid, as if Bolton was preparing something. That evening, under leaden skies that spat sleet, a horn blast sounded from the Bolton walls. A single herald rode out, bearing the flayed man banner. Robb and his guard met him on the field, near arrow range but under a temporary flag of truce. The herald was a pale, thin man with trembling hands. "Lord Bolton offers parley under safe conduct," he called. "He invites the king in the north to treat with him at the gate, that we may end this conflict." Robb frowned, exchanging glances with Theon and Mage. "Bolton is not known for honor," he murmured. "But refusing parley could be seen as weakness. And if there's any chance to end this without more blood, I must try." Mage scowled. "It's a trap, most likely." Robb nodded grimly. "Likely. But I'll not stand accused of ignoring a final offer of peace. We'll take precautions." So he agreed, telling the herald he would come to the gate at noon. The herald spurred his horse back inside. That night, Robb prepared carefully. He made sure the wolves were primed for swift retaliation if needed. He assigned a squad of his best archers to cover him from hidden positions. He would not be alone at the gate, bringing Theon and a small guard. If Bolton tried treachery, the entire plan would turn. Dawn arrived, bleak and cold. Noon was scarcely brighter, the sky a heavy sheet of iron. Robb, clad in fur-trimmed armor, rode with Theon and a detachment of 20 men across the snow-crusted field. Gray wind patted alongside them. They halted within shouting distance of the massive Dreadfort gates. With a groan of chains, the gates opened. A small group emerged, led by Roose Bolton himself. He was a pale, quiet man, with heavy-lidded eyes and a whispery voice. At his side rode Ramsay Snow, bastard and rumored sadist, a faint smirk curling his lips. They brought no more than a dozen riders, all armed but keeping their distance. The two parties faced each other in a tense silence, separated by a few dozen yards of churned snow. Roose Bolton spoke first, voice carrying in the hush. "King Robb, I see you come not alone." "Naum." "And you stand with your bastard," Robb replied calmly, but his anger simmered. "Say what you must." Bolton's eyes flicked to gray wind. "Your collection of wolves has proven troublesome. You've inflicted heavy losses on my men, disrupted our stores. Impressive tactics for a boy." Robb gave no answer to the taunt. Bolton sighed theatrically. "But we need not spill any further blood. Let us put aside these differences. I propose you withdraw your forces and lift the siege. In return, I will acknowledge you as Warden of the North under the Iron Throne." He smiled thinly. "Ample room for both our houses to prosper." Robb's jaw clenched. "You betrayed House Stark, murdered our allies. I will not share the North with a traitor." Ramsay laughed, a cruel sound. "You speak of betrayal, and yet you have turned to dark sorcery, commanding beasts to slaughter men in the night. Is that not dishonorable?" Robb forced himself not to rise to the provocation. "Your father murdered prisoners, flayed them alive, terrorized villages. Don't speak to me of honor." "Nen." Bolton's expression remained placid. "Ah, yes. Then I suspect no negotiation will sway you." "There is only one path to peace," Robb replied. "Surrender the Dreadfort, yield your arms and submit to Stark justice, or prepare to see your gates broken." Bolton inclined his head slightly. "Very well. Then I suppose we have nothing more to discuss." He turned to ride away but paused. "I wonder, Robb, if you truly comprehend the beasts you keep at your heels. Wolves are savage, mindless in their hunger. Soon enough, they may turn on you." "Nanter." Ramsay sneered, spurring his horse. "We'll see how strong your bond is when you choke on your own blood." The Bolton party withdrew, gate creaking shut behind them. Robb exhaled slowly, anger roiling inside. No peace then. Only blood would settle this. He turned to Theon, voice low. "We prepare for the final assault. Gather the lords. Tonight we break them." "And if they hold?" Theon asked. Robb met his gaze. "They won't. Not with the wolves at our side." That night, the snow began in earnest, swirling in thick, wet flakes. The wind howled across the battlements, as if echoing the wolves' song. Lanterns glowed in the Stark camp, reflected off the ever-deepening drifts. Still, the siege continued. Robb devised a bold plan. While a portion of his forces would launch a feint on the main gate at first light, he would lead a strike force, guided by the wolves, to slip through a hidden postern gate on the fortress' northern side. Months of intelligence from Warg had revealed the neglected state of that area, lightly guarded. If they could seize a portion of the wall, they might open the gate from within, letting the rest of the Stark host pour in. They moved out before dawn, Robb at the head of a column of 200 men. Theon accompanied him, along with Mage Mormont and the Blackfish. Wolf packs fanned out, scouting. The falling snow muffled their approach. Gray wind guided them to a narrow ravine behind the fortress. Guards on the walls above might see little in the swirling snow. The postern gate came into view, a small iron-bound door set in the massive wall. Torchlight from above flickered faintly. Robb signaled for silence, sending a handful of men forward to dispatch the gate's watchers. A cry rang out. One of the watchers, half asleep, saw them too late. Wolves lunged, bringing him down. The other watchman tried to blow a horn, but an arrow found his throat. Swiftly, they overran the gate. Robb, heart pounding, pressed forward, gray wind at his side. He forced the door open with a heavy shoulder. The ring of steel echoed as the Starks clashed with Bolton guards inside a cramped corridor. The fight was brutal but quick, the Boltons taken by surprise. They spilled into an inner courtyard, the wind and snow swirling. Shouts rose from the walls. Bolton men rushed forward, struggling to form a cohesive defense. The courtyard turned into a chaotic melee. Steel on steel, men crying out, wolves darting among them with snapping jaws. The plan was working, but the Boltons were numerous and desperate. A crossbow bolt streaked past Robb, narrowly missing his chest. He ducked behind a column of crates, returning with a slash at a Bolton soldier who closed in. Another came from the side, blade raised. Gray wind leapt, dragging the man down. Mage Mormont's roar echoed, leading her Bear Island warriors into the fray. Courtyard churned with bodies. Robb fought with grim efficiency, conscious of Gray Wind's proximity. Their synergy was uncanny, each aware of the other's movements, a lethal dance of man and wolf. Elsewhere, Robb heard the distant pounding of the main assault. The rest of the Stark army was attacking the gates, drawing much of Bolton's force. If Robb's strike team could secure this courtyard, they could open the north gate and let the rest of his men in. A clang rang out behind him. He turned to see Theon locked in combat with a grizzled Bolton sergeant. Robb rushed in, parrying the sergeant's sword and driving him back. Theon plunged his dagger into the man's side. A glimmer of movement caught Robb's eye. Ramsay Snow. The bastard had appeared on the opposite end of the courtyard, rallying a knot of Bolton men. He wore black leathers, a wicked smile twisting his lips despite the chaos around him. Robb snarled. He yearned to cross blades with the bastard right then and there. But Ramsay, seeing Gray Wind, took a step back, shouting for archers. Arrows whistled, forcing Robb and Gray Wind to dodge behind the makeshift cover of crates and fallen barrels. Forward! Robb roared, urging his men onward. Take the ramparts. At his command, a group of Stark soldiers and Mormont warriors charged the steps leading to the inner wall. Archers from House Glover provided covering fire, pinning down the Bolton bowmen. Wolves joined, lunging at the ankles of fleeing foes. In the confusion, Ramsay retreated into a tower, cursing, leaving the lesser Bolton troops to die. Robb gritted his teeth. The man was cunning, but it would not save him forever. Soon enough, the Starks controlled the courtyard. Robb signaled to a trio of men. Open the north gate. The rest of our host awaits. They sprinted off. Robb took a moment to breathe, though the chill air burned his lungs. Mage Mormont limped up, a cut on her thigh, blood staining her furs. We've broken them here, she growled. But they still hold the upper walls. We'll clear them out, Robb assured her. He turned to find Theon, who was binding a shallow cut on his forearm. Then he saw Gray Wind, muzzle bloody, standing guard over a fallen Bolton soldier who still twitched feebly. Robb felt a pang. There was so much blood, but it had to be done. Thunderous cracking from the fortress gates announced the arrival of more Stark soldiers. Robb climbed the steps to the ramparts, sword in hand, hacking down a Bolton crossbowman. The wind whipped at his hair, and the snow fell heavier, swirling in gusts. From up here, he saw the battered gate as the Stark army poured into the fortress yard, the Bolton defenders scattering. Fires broke out in places, adding smoke to the wintry gloom. Shouts, screams, the clang of weapons. War had come to the Dreadfort. In the distance, he caught sight of Roose Bolton himself, flanked by a small cadre of men, retreating across a walkway toward the keep's central tower. A surge of rage welled in Robb's chest. He would end this. He motioned to Grey Wind. Together, they stormed across a rampart. 2 Bolton men tried to bar their way. Grey Wind lunged, disemboweling one. Robb ducked the second man's axe, driving his sword through his gut. He pressed on, breath heaving, heart pounding. The fortress was a maze, but he trusted Grey Wind's nose. At last, they arrived at a barred door leading into the central tower. Theon and Mage caught up, along with a handful of soldiers. They battered the door with axes and a makeshift ram. It splintered. Inside, a dark corridor led to a stair. Light flickered from torches. They advanced cautiously, hearing the shuffle of feet above. Then the corridor exploded into violence as Ramsay and a handful of Bolton soldiers rushed down, yelling. The fight was brutal, confined in close quarters. Steel flashed. Torches guttered. Grey Wind snarled, leaping onto a soldier's back, while Theon parried a savage cut from another. Ramsay lunged straight at Robb, a twisted grin on his face. Their swords met in a ringing clash. Ramsay was quick, cunning, fighting low, then high. Robb blocked and riposted, forcing the bastard back a step, but was nearly caught by a slash aimed at his thigh. Sparks flew. They circled each other in the narrow space. Ramsay bared his teeth. "You think you are the true wolf here?" he spat. "You're just a dog, hiding behind beasts." Robb's anger flared. He slammed his blade against Ramsay's guard, driving him up the steps. "I am Robb Stark," he growled, each word punctuated by a strike, "king in the north, and you are a rabid cur." With a final lunge, he knocked Ramsay's sword aside. Ramsay tried to dodge, but Robb caught him with a thrust to the shoulder. The bastard howled in pain, stumbling. A second blow might have finished him, but Roose Bolton appeared at the top of the stair, accompanied by more guards. Ramsay scrambled behind them, clutching his wounded shoulder. The corridor filled with Bolton reinforcements. Meg, Theon, and the others pressed in around Robb, forming a shield wall of sorts in the stairwell. They clashed with Bolton men in a savage melee. Grey Wind, stuck behind the lines, snarled in frustration, too big to weave through easily without risking friendly blades. Roose's voice rose, cold and steady. "Kill them. End this." Bolton soldiers surged forward, risking lives to break the Stark formation. The fight threatened to turn lethal for both sides. Robb gritted his teeth, seeing a lull in front of him. He ducked under a sword blow and bashed his foe with his shield, sending the man tumbling down the steps. Still, they were outnumbered. The corridor was cramped, and more Bolton men rushed from behind Roose. Robb realized they risked being overwhelmed. A new sound echoed below, the howling of wolves, and men shouting in alarm. The corridor behind them parted as a pack of wolves forced their way up, leaping over fallen bodies. Grey Wind barked an urgent command. The next instant, the wolves darted into the fray, jaws snapping. Their sudden intrusion created chaos among the Bolton ranks. Some soldiers turned to fight the wolves, only to be cut down by Stark blades. Others tried to retreat, pushing back against their own men. In the confusion, Robb locked eyes with Roose Bolton at the top of the stair. The man's face was expressionless. He turned and fled deeper into the tower. Ramsay limped after him. Robb fought to break free. 2 Bolton men barred his path, but Grey Wind tore into one's hamstring, and Theon dispatched the other. Together, they raced up the steps, leaving Mage and the rest to handle the remaining Bolton soldiers. They emerged onto the tower's upper floor, a corridor leading to the Lord's Solar. The door stood ajar. Inside, they heard ragged breathing, footsteps pacing. Robb advanced. Sword ready, Theon at his heels, Grey Wind prowling behind them. Within, Roose Bolton stood, sword in hand, blood staining his once immaculate cloak. Ramsay Snow slumped against a wall, face twisted in pain, a bandage pressed to his bleeding shoulder. A single torch flickered, throwing their shadows on the stone. Roose regarded Robb with cold disdain. "You breached my home, slaughtered my men. Was this always your destiny, to become a beast?" "Nelxendal." Robb stepped forward. "Yield, Bolton. Your men are broken, your fortress falls." Roose arched a thin brow. "No, I think not." He glanced at Ramsay, who tossed him a dagger with his good arm. Roose caught it deftly, now armed with sword and dagger. In a flash, Roose lunged, the dagger flickering toward Robb's chest. Robb twisted aside, meeting the sword stroke with his own blade. Steel rang. Got. Theon circled to flank them, but Ramsay blocked him, brandishing a short knife. Roose was swift, methodical, a seasoned killer. Robb parried a thrust, his mind thrumming with adrenaline. He felt Grey Wind's presence at his back, but the direwolf couldn't easily intervene in close quarters without risking striking Robb. The fight was savage, blades clanging in the dim solar. A feint from Roose nearly found Robb's ribcage, but Robb managed to deflect it. He answered with a slash that cut a shallow line across Bolton's chest. Roose hissed in pain, eyes narrowing. Ramsay, meanwhile, tried to stab Theon, but Theon tackled him, knocking the knife away. They wrestled across the floor, cursing. Breathing hard, Robb pressed the attack. Roose stepped back, dagger ready, but his foot slipped on blood-slick stone. Robb seized the moment, driving his sword through Bolton's torso. The man gasped, lips parting in shock. For an instant, Robb saw confusion in those pale eyes. Then Roose Bolton sank to his knees, blood bubbling from his mouth. "You are, Stark," he rasped, as if the words were a curse, before toppling sideways. Nearby, Theon pinned Ramsay, pressing a dirk to his throat. Ramsay spat and flailed, but his wounded shoulder weakened him. "Do it," Ramsay hissed. "Kill me, you craven turncloak." Theon hesitated, glancing at Robb. "What say you, my king?" Robb stared at Ramsay, the monstrous bastard who had committed so many atrocities. The desire to end him pulsed in Robb's veins. The man deserved no mercy. Yet he remembered his mother's plea for compassion. Would mercy serve any purpose here, or only risk more lives? He saw the hate in Ramsay's eyes, the madness. A man like that would never cease. He would only fester, kill, betray again. Robb exhaled, voice low and steady. "End him. He's too dangerous to live." Theon nodded grimly. "Ay." With a quick, clean motion, he opened Ramsay's throat. Blood splattered. The bastard choked, eyes bulging, then went limp. Silence fell in the solar, broken only by the crackle of the torch. Robb stood, chest heaving, staring at the two corpses that had tormented the North for so long. A swirling mixture of relief and sorrow filled him. So many had died, but the Bolton's reign of terror was ended. Theon rose, wiping blood from his blade, eyes distant. Grey Wind sniffed at the bodies, then shook his head, as if repulsed by the stench. Slowly, Robb turned, stepping back into the corridor. He could hear the clamor below. Stark men securing the fortress, calling victory. The banner of the flayed man would soon be torn down. Outside, the snow fell in a thick hush. Robb placed a hand on Grey Wind's mane, steadying himself. Then he looked to Theon. "It's done." They descended together, emerging into the courtyard, where Mage Mormont and the others had subdued the last Bolton remnants. Cheers rose at the sight of Robb. Men fell silent as they saw the blood on his sword, understanding the meaning. "Roose Bolton is dead," Robb announced, voice carrying in the night. "His bastard, Ramsay, as well. The Dreadfort is ours. The North is free from their tyranny." A roar of triumph answered him. Wolves howled in concert, their cries echoing off the walls, mingling with the cheers of the soldiers. The swirl of snow caught the torchlight, dancing in golden sparks. Robb gazed over the blood-stained courtyard, the battered men, the howling wolves. In this moment he felt a profound unity with the land and its people. He had done what he set out to do, reclaim the North from the worst of traitors. Yet he also sensed that this was but the first step toward a new future, one in which the king in the north bore both the steel of men and the spirit of wolves. Exhausted, he raised his face to the falling snow and closed his eyes. In the distance, he thought he heard the ancient trees of the gods' wood sigh in approval, as if the old gods themselves recognized their Warg king. Gray Wind let out a final, reverberating howl. Robb Stark, bathed in victory and blood, let the echo carry him onward to whatever fate awaited. Robb Stark stood in the courtyard of the captured Dreadfort, the snow swirling around him in thick gusts. Torches smoked beneath the twilight sky, lending the winter air an acrid bite. Behind him, the sigil of the flayed man still dangled in tatters from the battlements. Its wretched presence offended every sense. Men moved in a daze about the yard, dragging Bolton corpses into piles, tending the wounded, and casting odd glances at the king in the north, who had fought both with steel and with wolves. Exhaustion weighed on Robb's body, but a fierce heat of triumph still flickered inside him. Roose and Ramsay both lay dead. The very name Bolton would be spoken in hushed tones after this day, or so he fervently hoped. The dread that had lingered over the north for too long had been torn down, fang and blade together. Gray Wind pressed his flank against Robb's leg as if seeking reassurance. The direwolf's muzzle was still stained dark from the struggle, and his lungs heaved from the exertion of the final hunt through the tower's halls. Robb laid a hand on Gray Wind's head. "All is well," he whispered softly, though his own trembling legs and pounding heart told a different story. He wanted to collapse. He wanted to cast aside his burdens for a few precious hours, to sink into dreamless sleep. Instead, he turned to inspect the carnage around him. The men were exhausted too, and some eyed the corners of the fortress with fearful caution, as if expecting more hidden terrors. A few wolves still prowled among them, pulling scraps from fallen foes. Robb whistled low, a command that made Gray Wind's ears flick. At once the wolves began retreating to the edges of the courtyard, or slinking out into the night. They could sense the kill was done, and that the place of men was not for them to linger. In his mind, Robb could still feel them there. A faint awareness, like a choir of distant voices responding to Gray Wind's presence. Soon, though, the swirl of it quieted, and he drew in a shaking breath. Meg Mormont leaned on a bloodied spear nearby, her stout figure wrapped in furs, a white bandage tied around her thigh where she'd taken a cut. "We hold the Dreadfort," she said, half to herself. "The Black Heart of the North is ours." "Thanks to your courage," Robb said, "and the courage of every man and woman here." She gave him a fierce grin, though her eyes glinted with the pain she felt. "Tell me you have a mind to rest, Robb Stark. My Bear Islanders are ready to drop from their saddles." "Yes," Robb said. "We'll rest. But first, I'll have these gates swung wide, the Bolton sigil torn down, and a watch posted. Search every hall, corridor, and cellar for stragglers or traps." He might have delegated it to another, but he wanted it done swiftly. The Dreadfort was infamous for hidden chambers, passages, rooms used for flaying and torture. The entire fortress reeked of cruelty. If they simply occupied it without thorough care, they might miss pockets of men too terrified, or too mad, to surrender. Theon Greyjoy limped up, his hair plastered to his forehead by sweat, dried blood on his cheek. He'd been the one to kill Ramsay. The memory of that still hovered in the silence between them. Theon's eyes darted around, unsettled. "We've seized their strong room, the armory, the Great Hall, and the East Tower. Everything's secure as far as I can tell. My men are searching the dungeons now." He swallowed. "We found some ugly things. Prisoners, half dead, some old bones and rotting remains. You'll want to see for yourself, but not just yet." "Nanti." Robb's stomach twisted. He gave a short, grim nod. He had known the rumors, Ramsay's vile sport, Roose's tolerance for slow, methodical cruelty. But hearing it confirmed was another matter. He ran a hand over his face, weariness etched deep. "We'll do right by the living and the dead," he said quietly. "No one deserves to be forgotten here. Make sure any survivors receive medical aid. Then burn those torture chambers to ashes if we must." "Nah. Salmawa." Theon nodded and turned away, calling to a few men. Robb watched him go, feeling the swirl of conflicting emotions. Theon had sinned against House Stark in the past, betraying them at Winterfell. And yet here he stood, fighting loyally by Robb's side, putting a blade to the worst monster in the north. Some lines once crossed could never fully be mended, but at least Theon had helped end this menace. Perhaps in time, the North might forgive him, or at least accept him as an ally who had paid his debt in sweat, blood, and guilt. Robb turned to the night, which hung thick over the snow-swept yard. The fortress courtyard smelled of smoke, spilled blood, and fear. "I'll see to the men," he told Mage. "Then find me that flayed man banner." Mage waved a hand. Right away. Soon, they were hauling the Bolton banners down from the battlements, letting them fall into the mud. Some men spat on them, kicked them. Others simply turned away, too weary to waste energy on that final insult. Robb had them piled in a corner. He considered burning them, but something in him hesitated. Perhaps it was enough to let them lie in the filth, shredded and forgotten, as a reminder of tyranny undone. At length, the night deepened, the wind cutting sharper. Robb's men stabled their horses, found places to bed down. They posted double sentries at every gate and corridor. Gray Wind roamed the perimeter, occasionally lifting his muzzle to sniff. Robb wanted to lie down, but pressing matters remained. He made a quick circuit of the fortress keep, checking on the wounded. The number of Stark casualties was not small, but neither was it as high as might have been in a direct assault. The infiltration plan had saved many. The presence of the wolves had sowed panic, which tilted the advantage heavily. But even so, each body he saw weighed on him. He paused by each soldier to give a quiet word of thanks or comfort, wishing he could do more. The corridor leading down to the dungeons tested his resolve. A flickering torch revealed damp walls crusted with grime. Dark stains marred the floors, iron rings jutted from the stone, and the stench was unbearable, a nauseating mixture of rot and excrement. A few living prisoners still crouched in cells, blinking at the sudden arrival of any face that wasn't Bolton. Some were women, cowering in rags, others men with sunken eyes and scrawny limbs. Robb's men rushed to pry open the cells, urging them to come out. Sobs of relief and confusion filled the stale air. Robb fought his fury. A dozen times, his hand twitched to press deeper into the link with Gray Wind, that savage part of him, howling for vengeance. But there were no Bolton guards left to kill here, only the ghosts of cruelty. "Send for water and food," he told the guards. "Have them brought to the main hall. We'll care for them as best we can." Some of these people might have families out there somewhere. Others had known nothing but captivity for who knew how long. The gods alone knew how they might heal. But at least they were free. After ensuring that order was being kept, Robb found himself back in the upper courtyard. A few wolves skulked near the corners, sniffing the remains. With a quiet whistle, Robb urged them away, sending them outside the gates to prowl the frosty landscape instead. Gray Wind lingered, massive and silent, as though waiting for Robb's next move. The night was well advanced. Pale moonlight touched the top of the towers in shimmering silver. "Come," Robb murmured to Gray Wind. "We'll find what rest we can." He trudged across the yard to a keep entrance. Soldiers stepped aside with murmured greetings. He forced a faint smile in return. Inside, the corridors felt claustrophobic. Once or twice he paused, catching a glimpse of some dark shadow or hearing a scuff of a distant footstep. His mind conjured the memory of Ramsay's sneer, Rue's pallid face. They were gone, but their ghosts lingered in the gloom. Finally, he reached a chamber that had once belonged to some minor Bolton retainer. The door creaked. The furnishings were sparse: a table, a half-rotted chair, and a straw mattress that smelled faintly of mildew. It would suffice. He dropped onto the mattress, trying to ignore the chill that seeped up from the stone. Gray Wind curled near the door, muzzle on his paws. A single candle provided weak light. Robb stared at it for a long moment, his mind ablaze with worry, triumph, regret. Sleep tugged at him, heavy and insistent. At last, he let his head rest, refusing the swirl of thoughts. But as he drifted towards slumber, he felt a presence in his mind, that old call, the pull of the wolf. He had grown used to it. Slipping into Grey Wind's senses was second nature now. Yet he strove to keep the boundary intact, to remain fully human for once. A part of him quaked at how natural it was to flee into the wolf's instincts. But the king had no choice. He had responsibilities that a wolf would never understand. He blinked, drifting, and let the candle burn down. Darkness claimed him. At some unknown hour, he dreamt of the Godswood in Winterfell. The red leaves of the weirwood rustled around him, and the tree's face wept crimson tears. Robb saw wolves all around, their eyes glowing, their shapes flickering between shadows. The wind carried voices he almost recognized. Father, mother, Bran. He tried to speak, but no words would form. He took a step closer to the tree and found himself sinking into the snow. Then a roar of wind blasted across the clearing, rattling the branches, scattering the wolves like a broken ring. He felt a cold older than winter creeping up his legs, devouring him. In desperation, he reached out, and Grey Wind was there. A solid presence. Their minds touched, and in that second, the dream shattered. He jerked awake, heart hammering in the gloom. No candle, no glow, just the faint dawn light that trickled in through a narrow window. Grey Wind's ears were up, alert at some distant sound. For a moment, Robb was too disoriented to remember where he was. Then reality rushed back in. The Dreadfort. The battle. The Boltons. He sat up slowly, his muscles stiff and sore. In the corridor, he heard footsteps. A Stark soldier knocked, then stuck his head in. "My lord, we're assembling in the Great Hall if you'd join us." Robb rubbed his face. Eh? He rose, pulling on his sword belt, and stepped out with Grey Wind close behind. The Great Hall was a cold, ugly chamber, with high rafters and walls of pale stone. Tapestries depicting flayed men and monstrous faces had been ripped down, leaving blank patches on the walls. The floor was scarred, a testament to the cruelty once practiced here. Stark and Mormont guards ringed the space. The freed prisoners were huddled near the hearth. A few were able to stand. Others sat slumped, wrapped in blankets. Food and water had been laid out in battered wooden bowls. Some stared blankly at nothing, too broken to speak. At the far end, Mage Mormont, Theon, Sir Brynden Tully, Lord Glover, and other captains gathered around a makeshift table where a ragged map of the north was pinned down by daggers. Robb joined them, scanning their tired faces. Each wore an air of grim satisfaction, but also a question. What now? Brynden Tully cleared his throat. "We've taken the fortress, Your Grace. The Bolton forces are either dead, scattered, or captured. We have a few highborn among the prisoners, but none with real influence. Most of Roos's known loyalists are accounted for." Lord Glover drummed his fingers on the table. "We have to decide how to handle the fortress itself. The Dreadfort is a seat of old power, blackwood and iron, the rumored labyrinth beneath. It can't be left unguarded. But the men are shaken. Few want to remain here. We'll need to place a garrison," Robb said, voice rasping with fatigue. "It will be a Stark holdfast now, or one for a bannerman who's proven loyal." He frowned, mindful of the swirl of alliances. "Perhaps you, Lord Glover, or one of your kin, would see it held in the name of House Stark." Glover inclined his head, though he grimaced. "I hold it if you command me, though it's no joy to claim a fortress soaked in such foul deeds." Mage grunted. "We'll clean it up. Spread salt, burn the worst of the rooms. The spirits of the flayed deserve no quarter." Robb exhaled. "Yes, we'll see to it. But first, we must address the rest of the north. The Boltons were a cancer, but House Karstark is still astray. We've also had no word on the Freys, or any alliances they might seek to make. And White Harbor waits, uncertain. Winterfell needs to be rebuilt, but we also can't ignore the possibility of aggression from the south. If the Lannisters reassert themselves, or Stannis, we might be strong now, but we're not invincible." "Men?" Theon scratched at the stubble on his jaw. "Your mother is back at Winterfell, along with any new arrivals. We should return there soon, I think. I agree, Robb said. But not empty-handed. We'll send ravens telling all that the Boltons are vanquished. We'll proclaim that any who once feared to stand against them may now come forward without fear. The North must unify, or these battles will never end. Sir Brynden tapped the map. And the Karstarks. I'd wager they've heard by now. But after you executed Rickard's son for treason, Lord Rickard himself is rumored to hold a bitter grudge. If they join with the Freys or linger in defiance, we might face another conflict. We can simply ignore them. Robb nodded. We can't. Nor can we ride off to assault Karholt. The men are spent, and I'd rather try to reason before we turn to steel. I'll send an envoy. Perhaps one carrying word of the Boltons' defeat and an invitation to parley under safe conduct. If they refuse, we consider other measures. Mage looked skeptical. They might not yield easily. Robb grimaced. True. But we'll try. It's better to make the attempt. Whatever their bitterness, they remain Northerners. They have no love for the Lannisters, and I suspect they must see that the tide has turned. They deliberated further, hammering out details of how best to garrison the Dreadfort, care for the freed prisoners, and dispatch ravens. Robb assured the men that as soon as it was feasible, they'd head back to Winterfell. For now, they had to secure their victory properly. Boltons had hidden passages, caches of weapons, perhaps even coin that might be used by remaining loyalists. Each day spent securing the fortress was a day risked, but leaving it half pacified could lead to an uprising behind them. By the time the meeting ended, the small slivers of warmth in the hall's hearth had receded, replaced by a creeping chill. The freed prisoners were being tended to more thoroughly. Some might stay as servants or find relatives in the north. Others might travel south if they had nowhere else to go. Robb was determined to give them whatever help he could. Stepping into the courtyard again, Robb found that the snow had stopped, leaving a blanket of white draped over the battlements. Thin winter sunlight filtered through the clouds, painting the yard in a wan, cold brightness. The air felt sharp in his lungs as he inhaled. He walked to the fortress ramparts with gray wind, wanting a better view of the countryside. The climb was tiring, his legs still sore from the fight. At the top, he let his gaze sweep over the plains and hills that spread out from the Dreadfort's walls. In the distance, pine forests stood like black lace against the snow. He knew that in those forests, wolves roamed, some already allied to him through the mysterious bond with Grey Wind. The memory of that victory against the Boltons glowed in him, but it came with a heavy cost to his soul. Already he felt the stirrings of a deeper, more primal longing, a whisper that urged him to run free under the night sky, to taste the thrill of the hunt again. He pressed his gloved hand to Grey Wind's fur, as if to ground himself. "Your Grace." A voice behind him. He turned to see Jory Risewell, a young soldier from House Riswell who joined his cause earlier. "My apologies, but your presence is requested in the Solar. We've found something unusual." Robb's stomach tightened. "Show me." He followed Jory through narrow corridors, up a short flight of steps. The men parted, revealing a hidden chamber behind a half-collapsed wall. The stench that wafted out was overwhelming, rot, old death, the sour reek of unwashed blankets. Robb covered his nose with a fold of his cloak. The others lit fresh torches, the smoke mingling with the foulness. Inside lay a bizarre tableau, piles of parchments, small jars of herbs, half-burned candles arranged in a circle on a table. The remains of animals, rabbits, foxes, once even a dog, lay in a corner, their carcasses decayed. But the strangest sight was a wooden stand in the center, upon which was stretched a large tanned piece of hide that still bore the shape of a man's torso. Robb's jaw clenched. It took all his will not to retch. Another soldier gingerly poked at it with the tip of a sword. "It seems they were trying something with the flesh," he said, voice thick with disgust. "Some dark ritual, or maybe just sick amusements." The parchments proved more disturbing upon closer inspection. Although Robb could not read all the symbols scrawled in thick black ink, he saw sketches of flayed bodies, intricate lines, suggesting something arcane. One page depicted a monstrous figure with wolfish aspects, arms outstretched as if commanding lesser beasts. Another showed a skull crowned with weirwood branches. The notes in the margins were in a cramped script, half in the common tongue, half in bizarre glyphs. Words like binding tether, old power repeated again and again. A chill slid down Robb's spine, colder than the winter wind. It looked as if Ramsay or Ruse, or both, had dabbled in more than simple cruelty. He recalled old rumors that the Boltons practiced dark arts, that they wore cloaks made from the skins of enemies. He'd dismissed much of it as legend, but seeing this chamber, he began to wonder what vile secrets they might have truly pursued. "Burn all of it," Robb said. "Every scrap. We will not let any remnant of their devilry remain." The men nodded, grateful for the order. They seized the parchments, the hide, the candles, everything. As they made to leave, Robb caught a glimpse of a small locked chest in the corner. "Wait," he said. "Bring that as well." The chest was forced open under torchlight, revealing a hoard of small personal items. Signet rings, bits of jewelry, coins from various regions, a few rag dolls, and other mementos. Likely trophies taken from victims or prisoners. For all he knew, it could have been Rusu's or Ramsay's twisted collection. A gold ring with the sigil of House Serwyn, a shard of a shattered sword bearing the Manderley Merman. Robb's throat tightened. Each piece told a story of someone suffering. He clenched his jaw. "Gather it," he said quietly. "If we can trace any heirlooms to families, we'll return them. Otherwise, bury them or melt them down. I want no trophies from horror." The men complied solemnly. Soon, the entire vile chamber was cleared. They carried the items to the courtyard, where a great fire was lit. Smoke rose in the midday sky, choking and black. Robb watched it ascend, fists clenched at his sides, thinking of the pain the Boltons had caused for so many generations. It was done now, or so he hoped. The remnants of that evil would melt away in flame. When at last the last scrap of hide and parchment was reduced to ash, Robb turned from the fire, shivering despite its heat. He found Mage Mormont at his side. She spat into the embers. "Grim business, but it's over." Is it truly over? Robb wondered aloud. The Boltons are broken, but the North is not yet whole. And these signs, they were seeking some twisted power or else mocking the old gods. Hard to say which is more frightening. She studied his face. "You fear they might have succeeded in summoning something monstrous?" He exhaled sharply. "I don't know what I fear, only that I see how easily men twist themselves into devils. Perhaps the worst horrors are only the ones men conjure from their own cruelty. Still, watch for any sign of unnatural curses. This fortress will be guarded or abandoned altogether if it proves too vile to hold." Mage bowed her head. "I'll volunteer some Bear Islanders to keep watch if you wish." "Thank you," he said with relief. "Lord Glover will lead the garrison, but your warriors would be welcome here. They're strong and unafraid." "Not now." She patted his arm. "Rest while you can, Robb Stark. We'll guard you." He nodded absently. But rest wouldn't come easily. Already the demands of rulership pressed upon him. His father's voice echoed in his memories. A good king must serve the realm before himself. Robb swallowed hard, squaring his shoulders. He would be that king, or he would die trying. Before dusk, the men prepared to depart on the morrow. A portion would remain as a garrison, a mix of Glover men, some Bear Islanders, and a few loyal knights from the Riverlands who had pledged to Robb after they'd seen the horrors inflicted by the Lannisters. The freed prisoners who wished to leave would travel with Robb's column back toward Winterfell, escorted and protected. Supply wagons were tallied. The battered banners of Stark were ready to fly. They would ride through the countryside proclaiming Bolton's downfall. Robb spent a final night in that dismal chamber, sleeping fitfully. He drifted in and out of the wolf dreams, glimpsing Greywind's perspective of the fortress exterior, the hush of the pines, the swirl of night breezes. In that half-state, he felt the presence of other wolves too, those in the deeper woods. Some minds flickered with confusion, uncertain whether to remain or wander. He tried to coax them to stay near, to form an invisible guard around the fortress in case of stragglers or raiders. Some responded with flickers of acceptance. Others drifted away. Each time, the borderline between man and wolf grew more tenuous, and he had to snap back to himself with a gasp, the darkness of the small room pressing in. By the time dawn crept through the arrow slit, he felt no more rested than the day before. He rose and donned his armor again. Lighter now, only the boiled leather and a cloak pinned at the shoulder. Snow had begun to drift anew, swirling lazily in the gray half-light. The courtyard bustled with men packing supplies, harnessing horses, finishing repairs to the gates. The smell of charred wood lingered from the funeral fires and the burnt remains of Bolton horrors. Robb breathed it in as a reminder never to let tyranny take root again. By mid-morning, they rode out from the Dreadfort in a long, grim procession. The gates stood open behind them, the battered walls now bearing a hastily daubed sigil of House Stark. Direwolf over the pale stone. Glover men raised their fists in salute from the ramparts, while the Bear Islanders offered a final roar of farewell. Robb nodded in gratitude. He and his main host moved east first, to circle around the fortress and gather any refugees or scattered survivors. Then they turned southwest, aiming to skirt the White Knife and eventually head back to Winterfell. A bitter wind whipped across the plains, stirring the horses into restless steps. Robb rode at the forefront, Grey Wind loping beside him, Theon just behind, along with Mage Mormont, Sir Brynden Tully, and a retinue of trusted soldiers. With them rode a cluster of freed prisoners who had nowhere else to go. Some were wounded, leaning on the saddles of more able riders. A few wolves trailed at a distance, enough to keep the column on edge, but Robb knew they meant no harm. They were watchers now, part of the strange tapestry that bound him to these forests. The miles passed slowly under an iron sky. Patches of forest and rocky hills broke up the plains, each spot bringing fresh caution. But the Boltons were routed, and no new enemies appeared. They found only the cold hush of a north sinking into winter. At night, they made camp, setting up tents, posting guards. The men shared tired conversation around small fires, the glow flickering on their faces. Robb often found himself walking the perimeter, Grey Wind pacing at his side, scanning the darkness. Once or twice, wild wolves watched from the tree line, eyes glinting. Robb felt a faint longing to slip away with them into the shadows. But he remained, forcing himself to focus on the duty of leadership. The solemn queries about rations, wounded men, and watch rotations. On the fourth day of travel, they reached a crossroads near a frozen stream. Snow blanketed the fields, and the stream's surface was glassy white, rimed in ice. Robb brought the column to a halt, while scouts checked the banks for safe passage. Nearby stood a small inn, half-collapsed and deserted, presumably burned out during one of the earlier skirmishes. A few men dismounted to scavenge any usable firewood. Theon rode up, jerking his chin at the far horizon. Some riders approach, flying a white banner. Could be Karstark men or someone else. Robb tensed. "We'll meet them. Have the men form up, but remain calm." Theon signaled, and the host spread out in cautious formation. Robb urged his horse forward, Grey Wind padding silently alongside, ears pricked. The riders soon became visible, a small party of 6 or 7, clad in heavy cloaks, carrying a banner of pure white with a black sun in the center. House Umber. Robb let out a breath, relieved. The Umbers had been longtime allies of House Stark, though the war had frayed loyalties on all sides. The lead rider was a broad-shouldered man with a shaggy beard and a scar across his nose. He reined in, saluting with a gloved fist. "Hail, King Robb." Robb recognized him as a minor captain from Last Hearth. "Well met. What news do you bring?" "Damned sadder war." The man bowed his head in respect. "We come from Last Hearth with a small escort, searching for your army. We heard rumor you'd marched on the Dreadfort and triumphed." His gaze flicked to the swirl of men behind Robb. "Is it true? Are the Boltons gone?" "Roose Bolton is dead, and so is Ramsay. The Dreadfort is ours. You may tell your lord that House Stark will tolerate no more treachery in the north." The Umber man's grin was fierce. "That's good tidings. We've had our fill of Bolton cruelty up our way. There's something else you should know. Lord Karstark was seen marching north, possibly to join with them. We've had no word since. Some say he's holed up near the eastern hills or perhaps retreated to Carhold. Robb's lips thinned. We suspected as much. The Karstarks remain unaccounted for. Do you know if they've allied with the Freys? Not certain. But we hear talk that old Walder Frey is still licking wounds from your earlier campaigns. He might be playing a long game, waiting to see how the North tears itself apart. The man's gaze fell to Grey Wind. They say you've got a gift, Your Grace, for leading wolves. Robb dipped his head in acknowledgement. True enough. No point in hiding it. The rumors had traveled faster than he ever expected. The man exchanged glances with his fellows. We'd like to ride with you to Winterfell, if you'll have us. We can lend a few swords, and Lord Umber might come south soon with more men if called. You're welcome, Robb said. We ride to Winterfell to gather the North. Send word ahead if you can. Let Lord Umber know we'd have him at Winterfell's Great Hall to discuss the future of our kingdom. Metropolitan. The small group joined Robb's column, swelling its numbers slightly. Theon smirked as they rode out. You see, your legend spreads. They talk of the young wolf and his packs like some story out of old Nan's tales. Robb managed a faint smile. I only hope it helps, not hinders. The last thing we need is men fearing me more than they respect me. He glanced at Grey Wind, who loped beside them. The direwolf carried himself with unshakable confidence. At times, Robb felt that strength flow into him, a silent assurance that together they could face any threat. But was that confidence his or the wolf's? It grew harder to tell. They pressed on, forging a winding path through the winter landscape, the day's light waning toward a stormy dusk. Snow came in fits and starts, swirling around their horses, sometimes turning the horizon into a gray haze. Yet they made steady progress, guided by men who knew the roads well. Each night, the wolves patrolled. Each morning, Robb rose feeling drained but determined to keep going. On the 10th day since leaving the Dreadfort, they finally approached the familiar lands around Winterfell. The seat of House Stark emerged from a low, rolling plain, its ancient walls partially rebuilt from the damage of previous battles. Smoke curled from the chimneys, a sign that many lords and soldiers had gathered. Robb's heart clutched at the sight. He remembered the day he left this place to avenge his father. The day he was proclaimed king in the North. So much had changed since then. Some of it an endless chain of sorrows. Some of it leading him to new powers and alliances he never imagined. But now, at least, he returned victorious, having broken the Bolton's hold. The gates swung open to admit them. Stark guards saluted, their faces brightening at the sight of Robb and Grey Wind. Shouts of, "The King in the North," echoed across the courtyard as the column filed in, men slumping with relief, horses stomping wearily. Robb handed off his reins to a stable boy, patting his horse's neck. Grey Wind moved ahead, sniffing the ground, tail held high. Servants bustled forward to help the freed prisoners dismount, to find them warm places. Theon and Mage peeled away, seeing to the final organization of the baggage train. Amid the swirl of activity, Robb heard a familiar voice cry out, "Robb!" Turning, he saw his mother, Catelyn Stark, stepping quickly across the yard. Her cloak was drawn tight, a swirl of red hair framing her face. Behind her walked a handful of men, including Edmure Tully and a few Riverlanders. Robb smiled, relief coursing through him. He opened his arms, and she embraced him in front of all the soldiers and wolves. "Mother," he murmured, "I've missed you." She drew back, eyes glistening. "When the ravens came telling of your victory over the Boltons, I thanked the old gods and the new. You look so tired, Robb." She gently touched his cheek. "I feared for you every night." "I'm all right," he promised, though he knew the exhaustion marked him. "Roose Bolton and Ramsay are dead. The Dreadfort is ours." She exhaled shakily. "Come inside, you must be freezing." They entered the great hall of Winterfell, which still bore scars of the past battles. Portions of the rafters were newer timber, and some sections of the walls were freshly mortared. Yet the hearth burned bright, and the banners of House Stark hung proudly once again. Men cheered as Robb passed, or knelt briefly. The crowd parted to reveal a table prepared for a feast of sorts. Hot stews, fresh bread, salted meats. In a corner, musicians plucked strings softly. The air smelled of spiced wine and pine boughs used for decorations. It was a far cry from the hollow emptiness that had once gripped Winterfell. Robb hesitated. He wanted to see to his men, to ensure each had a place to sleep and food in his belly. But his mother tugged him forward. "You need to eat too. They'll be tended by the stewards. Please, for my sake." So he acquiesced. He removed his gloves and cloak, letting a steward place them aside. Grey Wind stayed near the hearth, curling up in a broad space left empty for him. Servants bustled, offering Robb a chair at the high table. Steam rose from the bowls of stew, and the warmth of the hall made his cheeks flush. He realized he was ravenous. Edmure Tully hovered, wearing a grave expression. "Well done, nephew. House Tully stands with you always." Robb nodded, swallowing a mouthful of broth. "Thank you, uncle." "Have there been any new tidings from the south?" "None that bode well," Edmure said, pulling up a seat. "The Lannisters bicker among themselves, but they're still formidable. King's Landing is in turmoil under that whelp Tommen. He might be king, but Cersei pulls the strings. Word is that Mace Tyrell wields influence there too. For now, they've not launched any new invasion into the Riverlands, but I suspect they're licking their wounds and waiting for an opportune moment. As for us, I've managed to keep River Run secure, though I can't say the same for all the outlying areas. Bandits plague the roads." "No," Robb sighed. "We'll need to decide if we aim to keep pressing the war south or fortify the north's borders. Right now, we're too thin. We can push to the Trident with winter coming in full. The men are already worn down." His mother gave him a worried look. "Stay here, Robb. Rebuild. Our people have suffered enough. Let the lions fight among themselves." "And what of the Iron Throne's claim on the north?" Robb murmured. "I declared independence. The Lannisters may not accept that. They could attempt another invasion in spring or summer." She placed a hand on his arm. "We'll cross that bridge when we must. For now, the north has bled enough. Focus on healing, on restoring order. The Karstarks and other uncertain houses must be brought into the fold or dealt with. With winter closing in, no southern army can easily march north anyway. Let us have a respite from endless war." "Miss." He nodded slowly, acknowledging her wisdom. A part of him still yearned to avenge his father by seeing the Lannisters humbled once and for all. But the last campaign had shown him the fragility of alliances, the cost in blood. Father would have considered the needs of the North first. "We rest and rebuild," he agreed. "But we'll keep watch." They spoke a while longer, discussing the logistical challenges of feeding so many men, repairing Winterfell, and caring for the lands ravaged by Bolton aggression. The tasks seemed endless. Robb's eyes burned with fatigue, and more than once he found his thoughts drifting to Grey Wind, feeling that primal bond tug at his mind. He forced himself to stay present. Eventually, as the hall's bustle quieted, a steward approached to announce that warm baths had been prepared for Robb and any lords who wished to refresh themselves. At his mother's urging, Robb conceded. She parted with him, pressing a kiss to his temple. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "You carry so much. Remember you're not alone." He tried to smile. "Thank you, Mother." Then he left for the bath chamber, Grey Wind padding behind. On the way, men saluted or bowed. He acknowledged them with nods or a word of thanks, though he felt a strange detachment, like he was playing the part of a king in a mummer's play. The bath was a small luxury he had sorely missed. Steam rose from the water, the heat soothing every ache in his weary muscles. He stripped off his armor and clothing, stepping in with a soft groan of relief. Grey Wind settled near the door, ears alert as always, though his posture conveyed a certain relaxation too. Outside the door, Robb heard faint conversation among the guards, but for once he tried to let himself sink into a moment's peace. As the water warmed him, he closed his eyes, feeling the throb of old bruises, half-healed cuts. The scars of the war were etched on his body, thin lines across his arms, a deeper gash on his thigh. Each told a story, but the story was nowhere near finished. The memory of the black magic paraphernalia in the Dreadfort disturbed him deeply. Was that just a vile pastime of the Boltons, or part of something bigger? In the old tales, the long night had come with monstrous creatures. The wall existed for a reason. Even Father used to speak with quiet solemnity about the White Walkers, though mostly in the context of legends. But myths had a way of stirring, especially in times of turmoil. He let his breath out slowly, telling himself he had enough on his plate without chasing ghosts beyond the wall. Stannis Baratheon might be up there somewhere, or perhaps he'd perished in the snows. The wildlings were rumored to be restless. But that was a problem for later. For now, restoring the North was paramount. Finishing his bath, he stepped onto the chilly stones, toweling off quickly. The servants had set out fresh linens and a simple tunic. He donned them, hooking his sword belt once more. Despite the desire to remain in comfort, he knew he had to see to 1,000 more matters. Winterfell was a swirl of tasks: men returning from hunting, messages arriving by raven, the forging of new alliances, or the mending of old grudges. And among it all, the question of whether the Karstarks would bend the knee or force another conflict. Back in the corridor, Theon was waiting, arms folded, looking less uneasy than before. "How do you feel, Your Grace?" "Cleaner," Robb said wryly. "That's a start. Where's Meg?" "She's outside the Great Hall, drilling some of her Bear Islanders in the yard. Quite a sight. She's making them practice with spear and shield, as if we'd be attacked at any moment. She's determined that no one will catch us off guard." "Good," Robb approved. "We'll need that readiness if the Karstarks come in force." Theon hesitated. "About that, you plan to parley?" Robb nodded. "I'll send an envoy, though I'm deciding who to trust with the task. Carhold is a few days' ride east. Hard country this time of year." "I'd volunteer," Theon offered, though a flicker of nerves showed in his eyes. "But perhaps that's not wise. They might blame me too." Robb considered. "I appreciate the offer, but you're right. Lord Rickard might be less than receptive to you, given your earlier dealings at Winterfell. I need someone who can speak with authority, but also not provoke them." "Mage might do it," Theon mused. "She's well respected, and nobody doubts her loyalty to the Starks." That's a thought. I'll speak with her, see if she's willing." Robb paused, turning slightly. "What of you, Theon? Do you wish to remain here? Or do you have some plan to return to the Iron Islands someday?" Theon's mouth twisted bitterly. "I'm no longer welcome there. My father is dead. My sister rules, but she's forging some pact with the Ironborn Reavers. They want no part of me, a man who once pledged fealty to the Starks. I've no home but the North now, or whatever corner of it you'll permit me." "Jad." Robb laid a hand on his shoulder. "Then help me keep it secure. I won't forget your part in bringing down Ramsay. Let the old grudges lie. My men might not trust you fully, but actions speak louder than words." Theon nodded, relief and sorrow mingling. "I'll do my best." They shared a moment of understanding. Then Robb resumed his rounds. He found Mage soon enough, barking orders at a ring of Bear Island warriors who moved with swift, deadly precision even in the biting cold. She spotted him and halted the drill, coming over with a slight limp. "How's that leg?" Robb asked. She waved dismissively. "Healing. Bears don't fret over scrapes." "What do you need, King?" "I'd like you to lead a small company east to parley with Lord Karstark. Take a letter from me, sealed, inviting him to Winterfell to swear fealty, or, if he prefers, to negotiate any grievances. Do not risk yourself if they show hostility. If they refuse to listen, return here and we'll plan further." Meg pursed her lips. "I'm happy to do it, but my men will be cautious. That old fool is dangerous when cornered." "Dan?" "Agreed," Robb said softly. "We'll show we want peace, but we won't grovel. If he chooses war, it will be on his conscience. Are you certain you're well enough to ride?" She scoffed. "My leg will be fine. I can still swing an axe." She smirked. "I'll leave in 2 days. Enough time to prepare supplies for the journey." Robb nodded. "We'll have the letters ready." With that settled, he spent the rest of the day in endless small meetings. hearing the pleas of local villagers who'd come to Winterfell seeking aid, examining the fortress repairs, speaking with blacksmiths about forging new arrowheads and spear points. Everywhere he went, he sensed a shift in atmosphere. No longer was Winterfell a place of despair. Hope had kindled. News of the Boltons' defeat traveled quickly, and small folk told each other that the king in the north had saved them from nightmares. Now, if only the Karstarks would rejoin them, the north might truly stand together once more. Yet at dusk, as Robb stood in the godswood beneath the great weirwood tree, he felt a twinge of unease. The branches were bare, except for the ruddy leaves, and the face carved in the pale trunk seemed to watch him with ancient eyes. He knelt, pressing his palm to one of the thick roots. Snow dusted his hair and shoulders, and the reflection pool was half frozen. Gray wind lingered at the edge, sniffing the chill air. "I've reclaimed the north from traitors," Robb murmured under his breath, unsure if the old gods would hear. "But there's still tension, still fear, and there's the power in my blood. This warging link to the wolves. Is it your will, or is it just a remnant of old magic? Show me a sign if you can." Silence. Only the wind through the branches, the faint sound of water dripping beneath the thin ice. Robb bowed his head, not truly expecting an answer. He felt the warm brush of Grey Wind's muzzle against his shoulder. That was enough. He closed his eyes, inhaling the crisp air heavy with pine. A moment later, he thought he heard a faint whisper, like the creak of wood or the rustle of leaves. It might have been his imagination, but it stirred something in him, that swirl of potential. He opened his eyes, exhaling a misty breath. The old gods rarely spoke plainly. If they spoke at all, it was in riddles of wind and leaves. He stood, brushing snow from his knees, turning back toward the castle. Grey Wind trailed him, silent as a shadow. As Robb emerged from the godswood arch, a steward hurried over, breath steaming. "Your Grace, a raven just arrived from White Harbor. Lord Mannerly sends word." "Then?" Robb's heartbeat quickened. "Well, out with it. He says he's dispatching his son and a force of 300 men to Winterfell for the king's call, ready to discuss a new alliance. And also he's had contact from southern traders who speak of uncertain times in King's Landing. He hints that the city might soon be in disarray. Robb nodded slowly. "Good. If Manderley is sending men, it means White Harbor stands with us, at least for now. The potential chaos in King's Landing, I'll keep it in mind." "Naman shall." The steward handed over the raven's parchment, then hurried off to his next duty. Robb glanced at the lines, deciphering the formal language. The words were cautious but open to greater unity. Perhaps the knowledge of the Bolton downfall emboldened Manderley. If the North truly united, the Lannisters might think twice about marching a host up the neck. That would buy them time to rebuild. He found a quiet corner near one of the castle's newly repaired towers, reading the letter carefully. When he finished, a sense of cautious optimism settled over him. The largest port in the north was White Harbor, and if House Manderley lent its ships and coin to Robb's cause, they could secure trade routes for essential supplies, even in winter. They might also forge ties beyond the north. If Daenerys Targaryen was indeed gathering power across the narrow sea, well, that was a distant rumor, but in these chaotic times, any alliance might shape the future. But first things first. Reuniting the North, ensuring the loyalty or submission of the Karstarks, and stamping out any lingering Bolton sympathizers. And always in the back of his mind he felt that primal hum, the memory of teeth and fur and dark hunts in the forest, the unstoppable power he wielded through Grey Wind and the packs. A part of him wished to let that power recede into the background, to remain a weapon only for dire need. Another part whispered that he should expand it, reach beyond the normal wolves, perhaps, or delve deeper into his heritage. For now, caution won out. That night, a feast of sorts was held in the Great Hall, less lavish than the southern courts, but hearty enough for soldiers who'd marched and bled. They roasted boar, served spiced wine, and shared stories. Minstrels sang ballads of the king in the north who rode with wolves at his side. Robb sat at the high table, half listening, half lost in thought. He caught glimpses of Theon trading jokes with some Riverlanders, Mage discussing her upcoming journey. Servants poured drinks. Laughter mingled with the crackle of the hearth. It should have filled him with comfort, but a weight pressed on his chest. When the minstrel's tune shifted to a song of Ned Stark's honor and the heartbreak of his death, Robb excused himself quietly and stepped away, ignoring the curious looks. He walked through the corridors until he found a small balcony that overlooked the courtyard. The wind stung his cheeks, carrying the scent of distant snow. Down below, the fires burned low, and the stable boys moved from stall to stall with hay. The night sky shimmered faintly with stars. Gray wind padded up behind him, pressing a cold nose to his hand. Robb stroked his fur, grateful for the silent company. He whispered, "I've done it, Father. The Boltons are ended. But every victory feels like the start of another trial. I'm supposed to be the king in the north. Does that mean I must bear this weight alone?" Gray wind stared at him with those amber eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ancient hunts. The direwolf exhaled a soft huff. Robb shut his eyes, letting himself feel that companionable presence. A swirl of half-formed instincts teased at his consciousness. The wolf side of him urging him to run under moonlight, to let the burdens slip away for a little while. But he couldn't. His duty lay here in Winterfell, in the seat of House Stark, among men. Yet he promised himself, perhaps soon, when the night was quiet and his responsibilities allowed, he would slip into Gray Wind's mind for a run across the snowy fields, if only to remember that part of his soul was still wild and free. The next day dawned with an uneasy hush. Snow fell heavily in the early hours, piling drifts against the walls. Mage prepared to depart for Carhold, with her chosen companions, about 30 hardened Bear Islanders and a couple of swift riders, to bear messages back. Robb met her in the courtyard. She was mounted on a stout Garin, her leg bandaged but functional. Her warriors wore fierce expressions, unafraid of any Karstark ambush. Robb handed her a sealed parchment, bearing his offer of reconciliation. "Use your judgment," he said. "I'll not have you walk into a trap unprepared. If they greet you with hostility, turn back." "Nestor," she nodded firmly. "I'm no fool. If the old lord is set on vengeance, we'll see. But I hold some hope he might yield with the Boltons gone. Perhaps he still remembers your father's friendship once, though it's soured. Farewell, Robb Stark." "Farewell," he said softly. The gates opened, letting her company ride out into the swirling snow, banners snapping. Robb watched them until they vanished from sight. Anxiety gnawed at him. He wanted to send a host to force the Karstark's hand, but that would spark another open war. Better to try diplomacy first. In the following days, White Harbor's envoys arrived. Sir Marlon Manderley, the Lord's cousin, a large man with a keen mind for trade, accompanied by 300 men wearing the Silver Merman sigil. They brought salt fish, barrels of wheat, and casks of wine. With them came news that the Neck was relatively quiet, though rumors persisted of Freys skulking about the Twisted Oaks or near the Salt Spear, no doubt trying to intercept travelers. Robb gave Manderley a respectful welcome, hosting him in Winterfell's newly refurbished guest quarters. In the Great Hall, they spoke of alliances, trade routes, mutual defense. Robb quickly discerned that while Manderley was loyal to House Stark, White Harbor desired security for its lucrative shipping lanes. The Lord of White Harbor sought to ensure that if conflict ignited anew, the Manderleys wouldn't be left isolated against Lannister retaliation at sea. Robb considered the matter. "We can pledge that any threat to White Harbor by sea will be met with full support from the north. Though our navy is not large, we can dispatch outriders along the coast, and the wolves can hamper any forces landing by land. In return, we need White Harbor's ships to keep supplies flowing and to discourage any Ironborn raids." "And shall?" Sir Marlon rubbed his chin. "A fair arrangement. The winter storms make heavy naval battles unlikely, but it's the principle. Lord Wyman wants to be sure House Stark stands with us as we stand with you." Robb clasped Sir Marlon's hand. "We do. Together we'll ensure the North remains free." Metasekan. This was how the next week passed, forging pacts, hearing news from travelers, reorganizing the garrison at Winterfell. Soldiers from across the north trickled in, some pledging fealty anew, others seeking audience. Gradually the castle began to feel like the seat of a kingdom once more, not a ruin. Robb found small satisfactions in that, seeing the place come alive, seeing men walk with hope instead of dread. Yet each evening, he found a corner of solitude to let gray wind roam the castle grounds, or beyond. Sometimes he warged with the direwolf for only a moment, enough to check the perimeter in the wolf's keen senses, ensuring there was no threat in the night. Other times he forced himself not to warg at all, wary of how easy it was to lose track of time inside Grey Wind's thoughts. Then, on a morning thick with fog, Mage Mormont returned. She rode into the courtyard at the head of her weary band, half of them sporting new bruises and cuts. Robb hurried down to meet them, Theon and others at his side. "What happened?" Robb demanded, eyes scanning the group. Mage swung down from her saddle, cursing under her breath. "We tried diplomacy. The Karstark outriders let us speak to Lord Rickard, but it was an ugly reception. He ranted about the killing of his son, the broken promises. He claims you've lost the right to call yourself his king after that execution. I tried to persuade him that you'd done it out of necessity, that his son had slain the Lannister prisoners in defiance of your orders. But he wouldn't hear it." Robb's jaw tightened. "Did he threaten war?" "He did more than threaten. When I pressed him to accept your invitation, he spat that he'd sooner see Karhold burn than bend the knee to a Stark who'd betray his own. We parted on the edge of swords. One of his hot-headed captains demanded vengeance. A scuffle broke out. She shrugged, grim-faced. We lost 2 men, and they lost 3. In the end, they let us ride away, but Lord Rickard's final words were that he'll never bow." Silence fell around them. Robb felt a surge of frustration and sadness. Lord Rickard Karstark had once been among the staunchest Stark supporters, a loyal bannerman who had stood at Robb's side after Ned's death. But the bitterness over the execution of Rickard's son, who had killed Lannister hostages, had driven a wedge too deep. "So be it," Robb said quietly. "If he won't come to me, we may have to go to him, and risk open war in the dead of winter." Theon murmured, "It'll be disastrous. Karhold is strong, well-stocked, and the season favors the defenders." Mage wiped sweat from her brow. "We can't just let them remain a festering wound either. If we do nothing, Rickard might ally with the Freys or sabotage us at a key moment." "Nessa." Robb nodded, staring off at the snow-shrouded courtyard. "I know. We'll gather our lords, consider a plan. We might try to starve him out or blockade Karhold, but we have to do something." She bowed her head. "I'm sorry I couldn't bring him around." "It's not your fault," Robb said gently. "He's chosen his path. Rest now. We'll speak more later." With that, he let the Bear Islanders see to their wounded and their horses. All day Robb wrestled with the problem. Striking at Karhold was no simple matter. It was deep in the eastern territories, near the Shivering Sea, heavily fortified. Marching an army there in winter conditions would be slow and risky. Meanwhile, if they left Winterfell vulnerable, who knew what new scheme the Freys or the Lannisters might devise? Yet leaving Karstark to brood in defiance seemed equally unwise. That night, a meeting convened in Winterfell's Great Hall. Lords from across the north and the Riverlands joined. Sir Marlon Manderly, the Blackfish, Theon, Lord Glover, any who had a say in strategy. They debated for hours, discussing half-measures, alliances, possible ruses. Some advocated a swift and brutal assault, but others balked at the notion of shedding more northern blood. Robb sat at the head of the table, silent, listening, mulling over options. Eventually, he cleared his throat. "You all speak wisely. But if Lord Karstark refuses every olive branch, we must contain him. A blockade by sea might be possible with Manderly's help, but the Karstarks could hold out for months, or sally forth at our flanks. Another approach might be to isolate them. I have the wolves on my side." "Benhero?" At that, murmurs rippled. The power of the wolves was no secret, but it was still unsettling to many. Robb continued, "If I can disrupt their supply lines using the packs, harry their foragers, ensure no trade caravans reach Karhold, perhaps we can bring them to heel without a full siege. The men can remain at Winterfell or in protective outposts, only striking at the Karstarks if they try a major offensive. Sir Marlon rubbed his chin. Risky, but it might work. Karholt depends on trade from White Harbor for certain goods. If that flow is cut off by land and sea, Lord Rickard might see reason. Though. Brynden Tully frowned. Or he might grow even more desperate, lashing out. Robb nodded. True. But if we station enough watchers on the roads, plus the wolves in the forests, we might blunt any aggression. Winter is on our side in that sense. Travel will be harsh. Karstark can't mount a large-scale campaign without risking starvation. Glover exhaled. All this rests on your bond with the wolves. Are you sure you can coordinate them effectively so far from Winterfell? Robb's jaw tensed. I can. Ray Wind and I have done it before with the Boltons. We can do it again. And it's not as if we'll be alone. Our scouts and outriders will be in the field. The wolves are a supplement to our efforts. Then a silence fell, thick with tension. Some of the older lords shifted uneasily. Robb recognized their fear. They might have accepted that Robb was a warg, but the idea of truly unleashing wolf packs on fellow northerners, Karstarks, was a bitter pill. Yet what choice did they have? The ghosts of the war still loomed. Another open battle might destroy the fragile unity they'd built. If stealth and cunning could solve the problem, so be it. Finally, the Blackfish spoke. Very well. We'll commit to this strategy, but we must proceed carefully. We can't starve out Karholt if we ourselves lack resources. The men will be extended. The watchers might freeze if not rotated properly. Robb nodded. We'll plan the logistics carefully. House Manderley can hamper them by sea, intercepting any smugglers trying to bring grain or supplies. Our men will set up small outposts on roads leading to Karholt. I'll lead or coordinate wolf raids from Winterfell, traveling as needed. If Rickard tries a sortie, we'll be ready. The plan was set in motion. Over the next fortnight, they organized riders to scout the roads east, built caches of supplies for outpost garrisons, and prepared a modest White Harbor flotilla to patrol the coastline. Robb spent many late hours in the Godswood or atop Winterfell's ramparts, slipping into Grey Wind's senses, calling out in the deep night. Through that invisible web, he touched the minds of wolves scattered across the land. Some recognized Grey Wind's authority, others drifted away, more interested in their own hunts. It was never a perfect army. Rather, it was a tapestry of individual packs. Still, Robb felt a measure of success. At times, he could sense the presence of a half-dozen packs scattered in a broad ring, ready to respond to the call should strangers roam. He carefully guided them to watch the routes near Karholt, to remain hidden until a caravan or troop train passed, then strike swiftly before melting back into the woods. It was exhausting, draining Robb's spirit. Each time he returned to his own body, he felt a stab of dislocation. More and more, the line between man and wolf blurred. He found himself craving raw meat at odd moments, or reacting to sudden noises with an animal's twitch of aggression. He caught Theon giving him worried looks on occasion, and his mother's gaze brimmed with unspoken concern. But he couldn't stop. The North needed him to wield this power. A month passed. Reports trickled in that the Karstarks were indeed suffering setbacks. Supply wagons vanished in the night, their drivers found days later, trembling with tales of wolves that struck without warning. A few small skirmishes ended with Karstark outriders fleeing, harried by arrow fire and snapping jaws. Yet Rickard Karstark did not surrender. Rumors said he raged inside his fortress, cursing Robb Stark's name. The winter deepened. Storms lashed the coast, and the blockade by White Harbor tightened. But, still, Karholt stood, grim and silent behind its walls. In that time, White Harbor's men established a stronger presence around Winterfell, forging new bonds. Lord Glover secured the Dreadfort. The Riverlanders debated whether to remain for spring or attempt a hazardous journey home. Meanwhile, the fray seemed oddly quiet. Few travelers reported any large fray movements, though rumors placed them in uneasy alliances with lesser houses in the Riverlands. Possibly Walder Frey was content to bide his time, Yet Robb sensed tensions rising in the hearts of his men. They grumbled about the state of semi-siege, the endless vigilance, the strain on supplies. Some wanted to crush Karhold with a direct assault and end the matter. Others insisted that the blockade would work, given time. On the nights he warged too deeply, Robb sometimes glimpsed Karhold's walls from a distant vantage, sniffing the wind for signs of activity. But the fortress loomed inert, torches flickering along parapets. Only the howling wind and swirling snow kept watch. The wolves could not breach those thick walls. They could only deny the Karstarks food, forcing them to rely on stored grain. As the frozen weeks dragged on, frustration simmered. Robb found himself awake in the small hours, pacing the corridors, while gray wind padded behind. One night, he ventured onto the walls of Winterfell to stand under the pale moon. The courtyard below was dark, save for a few torches on the ramparts. He let himself slip once more into Grey Wind's senses, but only lightly, enough to feel the crisp night air and catch the distant scents. He tasted the crisp tang of pine, the distant smell of cooking fires in the town beyond the gates. A swirl of wolf thought teased him. Run, hunt, claim. He sighed, pulling back to himself. Then he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to see Catelyn approaching, wrapped in a thick cloak, her face etched with worry. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Robb, are you well?" He almost laughed at the question. As well as a king can be, with a rebellious lord holed up in his castle and half the realm depending on a man who shares his mind with wolves. She bowed her head. "I see how this wears on you. How often do you warg these nights?" "Enough to manage the blockade," he admitted. "I sense the packs, keep them near the roads, glean bits of knowledge about Karstark movements. It's draining, Mother. Sometimes I wake up not knowing if I dreamt, or if I lived those hunts." "Then the Samton." She squeezed his arm gently. "You're pushing yourself too hard. Let your captains share some of the burden." "But none of them can do what I do," Robb said quietly, eyes on the moonlit courtyard. "That's the truth of it. If we rely on normal men alone, Karstark might break through or slip away. The blockade is held together by fear of the wolves. And I am that fear." Her lips tightened in sympathy. "I wish there were another way. I remember Bran's gift, how it changed him. But he was younger and—" "Is there word of Bran? Or Rickon?" Robb asked, a sudden ache in his chest. For so long, he'd had no news of his younger brothers, once rumored to be fleeing Theon's ill-fated capture of Winterfell. He'd heard scattered rumors that they might have gone north or hidden in the countryside, but nothing certain. He forced the question aside each day, as duty overwhelmed him. But now it returned, sharp. Catelyn shook her head. "No fresh tidings, but I keep hope alive. Perhaps they'll come to us in time. For now, we have Sansa safe in the Vale with her aunt, from what the rumors say. Arya remains unaccounted for, but we heard tales that a young girl matching her description was seen near the Trident. It's all rumor, no confirmation." Her voice trembled. "I can only pray to the gods we'll see them again." Robb swallowed. "We will. One day when this land is at peace. If only it were so simple." The dream of seeing all his siblings reunited in Winterfell felt impossibly distant. Yet he clung to it as a distant star in the winter night. They lingered on the ramparts a while longer, discussing small details. Eventually, Catelyn retired, leaving Robb to brood. He looked over at Grey Wind, the direwolf's fur silvered by moonlight. "Tell me, old friend," Robb whispered. "Is there another approach to end this feud with Karstark, or must we starve them out until they yield? Should I risk men in an assault?" Grey Wind only blinked, amber eyes reflecting the pale glow. In the morning, a new raven arrived from one of the outposts near Karhold. The courier, shivering despite layers of fur, brought the parchment directly to Robb in the Great Hall, his breath fogging as he spoke. "Urgent news, Your Grace. The Karstarks attempted a raid on our outpost last night. Wolves and our sentries drove them off, but we lost a few men. They retreated back behind their walls." Robb read the parchment swiftly. The details confirmed what the courier said. 5 Karstark riders attacked in darkness, likely searching for a weakness in the blockade or scouting a route to break free. They were repulsed by arrow fire and a sudden flanking attack from a wolf pack. One Karstark was killed, another badly wounded, the rest escaped. Robb set down the parchment with a grim look. He's growing desperate. If he tries a larger sword, he will face a pitched fight in the snow. Brynden Tully was at his side, arms folded. And you'll respond how? Robb's throat felt tight. We double the watch, maintain the blockade, and I'll see if the wolves can confirm their next move. The repetition was wearing on him. That night, he prepared for a deeper warg than usual, determined to glean a clearer sense of Karhold's activity. The snow had ceased, leaving a still, freezing landscape under a starless sky. He climbed to a tower chamber alone, locking the door behind him. There, beside a flickering candle, Grey Wind lay, calm but watchful. Robb knelt, resting both hands on the direwolf's thick coat, inhaling slowly. He steadied his mind, letting the tension of the day drain away. Then, gently, he pushed his awareness into Grey Wind's, feeling the familiar slide into that primal perspective. Darkness sharpened. He saw the stone walls in a deeper clarity, smelled the faint traces of men, smoke, cooking grease. He rose onto 4 legs, padding in a circle. Far below, the courtyard spread out, though it was only a dim echo from inside the tower. Robb willed the direwolf to leave the room. Grey Wind stood, sniffed at the door, then scratched. Outside, a guard opened it, startled to see the direwolf. He let Grey Wind pass without question, though confusion played on his face. Under the moonless sky, Grey Wind emerged into the courtyard. The chill air felt invigorating, a swirl of scents that made the wolf's heart leap. Robb forced himself to stay focused. He trotted through the gate passage. Guards there stepped aside in wary respect, then into the open fields beyond Winterfell. The snow was deep, but Grey Wind bounded across it with ease, breath fogging. In the distance, across miles of white, Robb sensed the presence of other wolves. A pack responded to Grey Wind's silent call, from the line of pines near a distant slope. He guided Grey Wind that way, mindful of the tiredness in his own mortal body, but determined to glean intelligence. Perhaps by linking with a wolf pack closer to Karhold, he could glean a sense of movement near the fortress. He reached the waiting wolves, their eyes glowing in the faint starlight. They nuzzled Grey Wind, acknowledging him as Alpha. Robb pushed further, trying something he had only attempted a few times, extending his consciousness through Grey Wind to brush against the senses of another pack leader. In a swirl of half-images, he found himself glimpsing a rough forest track, the smell of cold sea wind, a vague impression of distant torchlight on stone walls. The Karhold Road. He willed the connection to solidify, straining to glean more. Flashes. A group of men in cloaks moving along a hillside. The tang of blood in the air. Then the link wavered, threatening to snap. Robb struggled to maintain it, but the sensation slipped away like smoke through his fingers. He shook his wolf's head, letting out a low growl of frustration. The lesser wolves didn't share the bond easily. Grey Wind was his anchor. With other wolves, it was like chasing shadows. Still, he sensed new tension in the packs around Karhold. Something was stirring. The men in cloaks might have been another raiding party or Rickard Karstark himself. That was all he could glean. Weariness weighed on him. He needed to return before his mortal body collapsed. He guided Grey Wind back toward Winterfell, bounding across the fields, slipping through the gates. The guards let him pass, accustomed now to the direwolf's nightly comings and goings. The tower door stood closed, the same guard wide-eyed as Grey Wind scratched again. Inside, the candle burned low. Robb let his consciousness unravel from the wolf's senses, snapping back into his human form. He gasped, body shaking from the shock of re-entry. It was too much. He collapsed against the chamber's cold stone wall, hugging himself, breath ragged. A wave of vertigo rushed through him. Grey Wind approached, whining softly, sniffing his face. Robb tried to calm the pounding in his ears, the disorientation. When he finally stood, his legs felt like water. "I'm all right," he whispered, though no one else was there to hear, except the direwolf. Just exhausted. He staggered to the small bed in the corner, letting himself drop onto the rough blankets. Gray wind curled beside him on the floor. Robb drifted into a restless sleep, haunted by half-formed visions of Karhold, hearing the distant howls of a pack beyond his reach. When morning came, he awoke stiff and chilled. Candle was burned out. Head throbbing, he splashed water on his face from a basin, then headed down to the hall. The day's business awaited, but his mind was slow, body heavy. A maid offered him bread and a cup of ale, which he took gratefully. The old gods help me, he thought. If this drags on all winter, I'll be reduced to a husk. He was about to speak with Theon when a commotion erupted in the courtyard. Voices shouted. Robb rushed outside, Theon and a few guards at his heels. There, near the gate, a ragged group of Karstark men, at least a dozen, stood with hands raised in surrender. Stark soldiers ringed them, weapons drawn. The Karstark men looked half-frozen, exhausted, and one carried a crude white banner. Robb strode forward, chest tight. One of the Karstarks, a young bearded man, lifted his gaze. "We come to treat with you, King in the North. We bring words from Lord Rickard." Robb's men tensed, but Robb raised a hand. "Speak." The man swallowed. "Lord Rickard is ill. The winter and the blockade have taken a toll on our supplies. We can't hold out much longer. He offers his own life if you will spare Karhold and the people. The fortress, the lands, the folk. They shall be yours if you grant them mercy. He only asks that you end his life personally, as he will not kneel to you again." The man's voice shook with bitterness. A hushed silence fell. Robb felt a strange ache in his chest. "He's offering himself for execution in exchange for Karhold's submission," he repeated, scarcely believing it. "Eh," the Karstark man said. "He knows you cannot forgive him, nor he you. He says that if you've any honor left, you'll not punish the innocent for his pride. Karhold's gates will open to your men if you agree to his terms." Robb stared at him, a swirl of emotions roaring inside. He'd seen something like this before, with the execution of Lord Rickard's son. The Karstarks had once stood side by side with the Starks, loyal bannermen for centuries. Now it ended in tragedy. Theon shifted uneasily, while the guards watched with grim faces. Finally, Robb cleared his throat. "Very well. Let us discuss further inside. We'll not harm you. You have my word." The group was escorted to the hall, where they were given blankets, hot drinks. They repeated their message before Robb's closest advisors. The terms were stark. Rickard Karstark refused to bend the knee, but would surrender his hold if Robb would claim his life in front of Karhold's men. An execution in which Rickard would die standing, cursing the name Stark with his final breath if that was how it must be. The people would then be free to swear fealty to Robb or depart. All Rickard asked was that they not be slaughtered or exiled. In essence, it was a grim ritual of final defiance, with the fortress changing hands without further bloodshed. Caitlin stood by Robb's side, looking appalled. Theon cursed under his breath. Sir Brynden Tully shook his head. "He wants a noble death on his own terms." "Or a twisted notion of it," Robb murmured. "If I agree, I become the man who kills yet another Karstark. Will that truly mend the North, or make me an object of more hatred?" The Karstark messenger bowed his head. "He says if you refuse, we'll fight to the last man. The folk of Karhold will starve or die in battle, but they'll never yield. He sees no other path. He cannot kneel to you, after what you've done, and after what he's done." A hush followed. Robb felt his mother's hand on his arm. He knew what she wanted him to do. Spare more bloodshed. Yet the cost was his own soul, grimly shaped by taking the Lord's head. He recalled how he once beheaded Rickard's son for murdering Lannister hostages, a stain that never washed away. Now he would do the same to the father? Meg Mormont, newly returned and listening in, shifted. "Better one man's life than 1,000. Karhold's men might rally to you once he's gone. Or they'll at least accept your rule if you show them mercy." "Nine." Robb closed his eyes for a heartbeat, remembering Ned Stark's words. "The man who passes the sentence must swing the sword." "I will accept," he said at last. "For the sake of the people of Karhold and the unity of the North, I will do as he asks." And so, it was agreed. Within days, Robb gathered a small host, enough to take possession of Karholt peacefully. The rest of his men remained in Winterfell. Wolves would patrol the roads no longer. The blockade lifted. The Karstark messengers returned, bearing Robb's acceptance. The final meeting was arranged. Robb Stark would ride to Karholt with a retinue and do the deed. Rickard Karstark would meet him in the courtyard. Then the fortress would yield. It felt like a dark omen, yet an unavoidable one. On the morning he departed, the sky threatened another snowfall. The courtyard of Winterfell was subdued, men and women lining up to watch as Robb mounted his horse. Grey wind hovered, silent and tense. Catelyn stood close, her face pale. "Be careful," she whispered, voice shaking. "I know it's meant to be peace, but be on your guard. Killing a man in front of his own fortress is never a simple matter." "Menhas." "I will," Robb promised. "Pray the old gods guide my hand." Then he rode out with Theon, Maege, Sir Brynden, and about 200 men, the bulk cavalry with some foot for stability. They carried the Stark banner. The wolves roamed the flanks, silent watchers of this funeral procession. The ride took 2 days in the bitter cold. Signs of the blockade's toll were evident. Farmland neglected, roads half buried, occasional glimpses of scorched wagon remains. Wolves patrolled the area, uncertain now that the blockade ended, but still drawn by Grey Wind's presence. When at last they crested a rise and saw Karholt, Robb felt a chill that went beyond the weather. The fortress loomed on a rocky bluff near a frozen river that led to the shivering sea. Its walls were high, dark stone crowned with ice. Torches burned at intervals, revealing a meager guard presence. Typically, Karstark banners would flutter, but in their place flew a white cloth of surrender. Silence hung heavy. They approached the gate, which was slowly opened by Karstark men. No arrows rained down. No challenge came. They entered the courtyard, which was lined with grim-faced soldiers and small folk, huddled in tattered cloaks. At the far end stood Rickard Karstark himself, leaning on a thick staff. He looked older than Robb remembered, hair snow-white, eyes sunken. His face was pinched with sickness, but his spine remained rigid. Robb dismounted, leaving Theon and Brynden behind him. He stepped forward, Grey Wind at his side, sword sheathed at his belt. The courtyard was so silent he could hear the wind rustling. Rickard Karstark's men parted to let him pass. Then Robb stood a sword's length away from Rickard. The old man's eyes flicked to Grey Wind, but he did not flinch. His lips parted in a sneer. "My father served your grandfather," Rickard said, voice hoarse. "And I served your father, yet here we stand." Robb bowed his head. "I never wished for this, my lord." Rickard coughed, spitting. "You took my son's head, now you take mine. But know that you are no true Stark in my eyes. You lost that claim when you chose the Lannister hostages over the blood of your own loyal men." Robb absorbed the blow silently. Around them, soldiers and small folk pressed closer, eager to see the final confrontation. Theon hovered, one hand on the hilt of his sword, tense. Maege's face was expressionless, though her knuckles were white around her axe handle. Grey Wind snarled softly, but Robb laid a hand on his head to quiet him. "We each made choices," Robb said, voice steady. "I cannot undo the past, but I'll end the suffering now. Will you speak final words, Rickard Karstark?" He straightened, drawing in a ragged breath. "May the old gods curse you, Robb Stark, for all your days. May you never know peace." He dropped his staff and sank to his knees, refusing to yield in posture but lacking the strength to stand. "Do it then. Let my people live." Robb's heart pounded. He saw 1,000 memories flash. The moment he executed Karstark's son, the battlefields of the south, his father's death. He felt Grey Wind's rage at his side, a raw hunger for blood. But he forced himself to act as a man, not a beast. Unsheathing his sword, he met Rickard's eyes. "For the crimes of betrayal, for the refusal to yield, for the sake of the North, I, Robb Stark, King in the North, do sentence you to die." His voice echoed in the frozen air. Rickard closed his eyes, face contorted in furious acceptance. Robb lifted the blade, ignoring the tremor in his arms. He brought it down with a swift stroke, remembering how his father had taught him. A clean kill, no unnecessary agony. The sword bit deep. Blood splashed across the snowy ground. Karstark's body crumpled. Gasps and cries sounded among the onlookers. A hush fell that seemed to swallow the world. Robb stood, sword dripping red. Grey Wind growled low, as if lamenting or protesting the finality of it. Robb's breath misted in the cold. For a moment, he feared he might collapse. But he locked his knees. "You are free," he said, voice husky, to the men and women around. "Karhold will remain under the protection of House Stark. Any who wish to swear fealty may stay. Any who do not may depart unmolested." A murmuring followed. Some Karstark men dropped to one knee, heads bowed. Others spat or swore, but none dared raise arms. The old lord was gone. The banner had fallen. A few families embraced, uncertain what the future held, but relieved that there would be no further slaughter. Theon stepped forward, placing a hand on Robb's shoulder. "It's done," he whispered. Robb nodded, too drained to speak. He felt hollow, as though part of himself had seeped out with the old man's lifeblood. Honor demanded he see it through. Necessity demanded it. But it tasted bitter as poison. Yet, in that moment, as the wind scoured the courtyard, Robb sensed something shift. The Karstark rebellion was ended. The blockade was done. Karhold belonged to the king in the north. The north was united under Stark rule once again, though at a price. A voice inside him whispered, "You have your kingdom, Robb Stark. But what have you sacrificed?" He stood there, the new lord of a battered realm, overshadowed by the consequences of war and the looming winter. The land was his. The wolves were his. And in the silent swirl of snow, Grey Wind raised his muzzle to the sky, howling a note of triumph that carried over the bleak fields. The Karstarks and the new masters of Karhold bowed or turned away, each seeking solace from the tragedy. Robb just closed his eyes, praying that this final stroke would bring some semblance of peace to the north, and that he could endure the consequences of wielding both crown and fang in equal measure. Over the next weeks, Robb placed a temporary castellan in charge of Karhold, with instructions to restore order, distribute food, and ensure no reprisals against innocents. Many Karstark men chose to bend the knee in exchange for mercy. Others left, taking families to the western hills, or even seeking refuge in White Harbor. Despite the tension, no more blood was spilled within the fortress walls. Robb's men oversaw the transition, ensuring Karhold's gates remained open to trade. As news spread, the rest of the north realized there would be no more internal war. The Boltons were gone, the Karstarks subdued, the other houses aligned. For the moment, the realm was at peace with itself. With that burden lifted, Robb departed Karhold, riding back to Winterfell with a much smaller escort. The sky was leaden, snow swirling in gusts. Grey Wind trotted ahead, ears flicking. Robb rode in silence, lost in reflection. Meg's grim expression echoed his mood. Theon held his head low, as if weighed by old memories. Even Brynden Tully's customary sardonic calm was subdued. Near dusk, they made camp in the lee of a pine forest. Men built fires and set watches. Robb slipped away from the main group, trudging through the snowy drifts until he found a small clearing beneath towering trees. The hush of the winter woods enfolded him, broken only by the soft rustle of branches. Grey Wind followed, stepping carefully. Robb sank to his knees, letting out a shaky breath. The stillness was overwhelming after so much conflict. He found himself shaking, the memory of Rickard Karstark's final words echoing in his mind. "May you never know peace." He wasn't sure if it was a curse or a prophecy. Then Grey Wind nudged his arm. Robb buried his fingers in the direwolf's fur, bowing his head against the thick coat. For a long time he stayed like that, letting the tears he'd held in finally flow. The tears for a shattered northern house, for the father he'd lost, for the endless burdens. He cried silently, the direwolf steady as a rock against him. When he finally rose, the winter sky had deepened, a scattering of stars peeking through ragged clouds. He felt cleansed, in a raw, painful way. Enough, he whispered to himself. No more. Let me shepherd the north now, keep it safe. Let me be done with killing our own. Grey Wind's eyes glowed in the moonlight, and Robb almost imagined the wolf understood. Perhaps he did. They returned to the camp, where the men offered Robb a bowl of stew. He ate quietly, not meeting their eyes. The next morning, they resumed their journey, moving southwest across frozen fields, the wind at their backs. As they neared Winterfell, the land looked calmer, with small folk rebuilding huts and barns, wagons carrying timber. Everywhere, they saw glimpses of hope stirring despite the harsh cold. Eventually, the walls of Winterfell came into view. Robb's heart clenched at the sight of them. The seat of House Stark, battered by war but enduring. The gates opened, letting them in with shouts of greeting. Inside, the castle bustled with activity. Sentries called from the ramparts, stable boys ran to take the horses. Robb dismounted stiffly, every muscle aching. Yet a deep sense of completion settled over him. He had ended the last major threat to his rule within the north. Catelyn met him in the courtyard, wordlessly embracing him. He held her close, feeling her warmth, breathing in the faint scent of lavender that clung to her cloak. When she pulled back, her eyes shone with unshed tears. You did what you had to do. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. So she simply clasped his hand, leading him inside. That night, after the formalities of explaining Carhold's transition to the Lords, after the weariness of reuniting with the captains, after the hush that fell across the great hall, Robb stood alone in his chamber. The wind outside battered the walls, carrying hints of a coming storm. Grey Wind lay near the hearth, half dozing. Robb moved to the narrow window, pressing his palm against the chilled stone sill. Outside, the night stretched vast and cold. He could almost taste the approaching snow. Yet he sensed the north as one land now, unified. The Umbers, the Glovers, the Mormonts, the Manderleys, the Mountains clans, the scattered loyal bannermen, all recognized House Stark's leadership. There would be no more defiance from within. The old sign of wolf supremacy was more than symbolic. It was real, in the packs that roamed under his command. He had become the king in the north who wielded both steel and the primal might of the wolves. But even as he allowed himself a flicker of pride, he recalled the curses spat by Rickard Karstark, the dark experiments discovered at the Dreadfort, the rumors from the south. The night was not yet over, and beyond the far horizon lay the wall, the realm of eternal ice. Whispers of an even greater darkness stirring. The war with the Lannisters might not be concluded. The Freys might strike again, and the White Walkers, if they truly existed, might one day pour down from the far north as a threat no army of men or wolves could easily withstand. Still, for this moment, he let himself breathe, let his aching body relax in the candlelit solitude. The burden was his, but so too was the crown. Tomorrow, he would plan the North's future, forging trade with White Harbor, rebuilding Winterfell, deciding how to respond to any southern entanglements. For tonight, he could only hope the old gods granted him and his people a respite from bloodshed. He turned from the window, crossing to Grey Wind. The direwolf stirred, blinking up at him. Robb knelt, pressing his forehead gently to the wolf's. He breathed in the musky scent of fur, letting the tension drain away. In that instant, he felt the distant chorus of wolves somewhere in the night, their howls echoing through frozen woods and windswept hills, proclaiming that the north was theirs, and it was his as well. He whispered, "We are Stark, you and I, bound by blood, bound by the old ways. May we keep the north safe from all who would harm it. May we never forget who we are." Grey Wind exhaled a soft whine, pressing closer. Robb closed his eyes, letting the moment soothe his raw spirit. Outside, the snow began to fall again, silent and cold. Within the heart of Winterfell, the king in the north drifted into a slumber tinged by wolf dreams, the knowledge that for now, at least, his people were united under his banner, and that he possessed a power as old as the north itself. Whatever trials the future held, whether it be Lannisters, Freys, or the encroaching dark beyond the wall, Robb Stark would face them with the strength of both man and wolf at his side. And the wind whispered through the castle towers, carrying that ancient promise into the long night.